just spoke at Dartmouth on health care at the medical school, or not, I guess I wasn't actually on the campus, but the people from the medical school were at the, I want to be clear, I'm not going nuts. I'm not sure whether it was a medical school or where the hell I spoke, but it was on the campus. I want to thank Rich Fitzgerald, the county executive, Allegheny County executive, for being here, and I propose, and I'm going to digress slightly, we're in a situation, the President asked me to head up a cancer moonshot.
President Biden, just to be clear, would you or would you not rejoin the TPP, yes or no?
I would not rejoin the TPP as it was initially put forward. In Guatemala, El Salvador, and to win and say in Honduras and say, look, I know I'm called middle class, Joe. It's not meant as a compliment, means I'm not sophisticated. And there's an area where there's an important difference between this, and there's an important difference between the candidates. And I'm running. The country wasn't built by Wall Street bankers, CEOs, and hedge fund managers. This guy is moving to foment hate. The price for whatever the drug costs are. Well, folks, eliminate one tax loophole out of $1.6 trillion worth, $1.4 trillion worth. Out of $1.4 billion. It's hard to even say it, it's so much. And by the way, it's cost a lot of money. It cost about $740 billion over 10 years. Every single solitary person qualified in community college, increasing the number of 6 to 9 million people. If you like your employer-based policy, you can keep that policy. If you agree with me, go to Joe 30330 and help me in this fight. If you want to be part of this campaign, pick up your phones. Pick up your phone. Now. Send a text to the word United to the number 30330. 30330 or 303330. Or VOO. Wait. You got it. It's on the back there. Now he's feeling the pressure of an economy that's teetering on a recession. To say that LGBTQ people have no civil rights. And immediately changed the law in the state of Delaware protecting transgender people. I took on Putin in terms of Iraq. In terms of what was going on in Ukraine. My long friend, time friend, and she's a friend. She's been my friend in and out of public life. It will cost 1/30th. 1/30th. Costs a lot of money. Almost $740 billion is what I want to do in 10 years. But not $30 trillion. Not $30 trillion. Among many qualified people, I'm the best qualified person for this job. And the reason is not just to help people who have or in fact are like to get Alzheimer's. Because think of what's been adopted. Milton Friedman's notion that the only obligation. That all changed with our Republican friends in the late 80s when they adopted Milton Friedman's notion that the only obligation. We find ourselves in a position where you're in a circumstance where we've adopted Milton Friedman's notion of conservative economy. Now, if in fact you are in a position, what was the case, you worked for Jimmy. That's why we're so special. It took courage. It took resilience. They know who we are. We have to let them know who we are. We can do it, and it's going to take billions of dollars to do it, and we can afford to do it. We can't afford not to do it. Cut in half the number uninsured of the Asian American Pacific Islander community. Cut in half. Don't worry, I'm so serious. Children, I love to hear them. But President Trump and the demagogues around the world. Donald Trump is re-elected. So people are figuring out there's not a damn thing we can do that we set our minds on. The single most stressed I was asked to speak to the American Psychiatric Association, to go over to the University of London to speak to the World Psychiatric Association. It's It's interesting. I just spoke to the International Society of Psychiatric Law, International Organization of Psychiatrists over in London because this is not a Republican talking point. The Republicans are trying to kill Obamacare. Union workers, the UAW took incredible cuts in their future. We have $1.6 trillion worth of loopholes in the law. But I never ever thought that I'd see what I saw at Charlotte. You know, I came home from law school. Avoid having an excuse to walk by the deal and say, no, I'm not going to be a mule. I got something to do. I got to go do boom, boom, boom. If we just were to reinstitute the CAFE standards. And I think Secretary, excuse me, I wasn't press going to say I'm downgrading him by calling him Senator Booker. The fact is that the bills that the future president here, that the senator's talking about, and I was the one that suggested to the president, President Obama, I don't want to confuse presidents here. Look, we provide a Medicare option. That's exactly what Brock and I talked about in the beginning.
Couldn't get it through, though.
So I couldn't tell anybody but Barack. He's one of my closest friends. Invaded another country and annexed a significant portion of it called Crimea.
Right.
He's saying that it was my boss, it was his fault. I got assault weapons banned for 10 years. It had to be reauthorized because of hanging chads in Florida. The last president said, no, I'm not going to reauthorize it. We need to work again with Canada and Mexico as neighbors, not as adversaries. Saks or Benettons or Nike or whatever in the market, in their places where the malls. Donald Trump does pose an excellent threat to this. It's not hypothetical. We could put every one of them in school, cutting in half the cost of a four-year education. Why they do that? I ran the what they call the moonshot, dealing with cancer, and something after that set up the Biden Cancer Initiative. And here's the point: the conservative columnist, and they say, "You take my shotgun." I said, "I have three. I now have five because my son died, and I have three of his. I have 5 shotguns." So have a mechanism to control drug prices. You know, it's not. We're no longer using chemical-based things. All this thing is dealing with cancers and other issues relating to the immune system or bioorganic. And by the way, the idea that the only people who entitled to rewards are stockholders. Ladies and gentlemen. He is deliberately and completely ignoring the legitimate authority of the Congress, and he's doing what he does with the complicity. Stop trying to keep your workers organized. His failure to exercise any international leadership. It's about all these breakthroughs we have with the whole immune system. I want you to know, if you look at PolitiFacts, we're no longer the wealthiest middle class in the world. It means investing much more in medical research to conquer devastating diseases like cancer and addiction and Alzheimer's. The opportunities are amazing. We are in a position to be able to lead the world like we've never been able to do it before. I mean, they're not bad folks. But guess what? I found that the secretary, we sat together in many meetings. There's things that are worth dealing with China. What presidents say matter. We also know we need teachers. My wife is a full-time teacher, taught all during being vice president. High-quality options. The public option will be available in my plan. We'll make sure it's not quality. We'll make sure it's only affordable. Quality is affordable. Not the end in themselves. It mischaracterizes my position across the board. Not those of us running for president alone. Not just activists like you. You know how many tax loopholes there are in the code now? 1 trillion, 640 billion. Eliminate one. How can a person dignity be maintained? We choose truth over facts. You ever heard a president of the United States talk about law enforcement like he does today? I oversaw, as chairman of the Judiciary Committee a long time, the FBI. Look what he talks about. But we lead by the example of our power, not just the power, not just the example of power, but the example. We're out there, and it's what we say. By strengthening, we have to eliminate the funding gap that exists between minority white and majority white and non-white districts. The fact of the matter is, I'm awfully sophisticated about why, how, and who built this country. Let me say this simply and clearly. They're not national assets. Wall Street bankers, CEOs, hedge fund managers, no matter how good and decent they are, they're not the ones who built this country. That triumph of democracy and liberalism over fascism and autocracy. When I got out of school, that when Bobby Kennedy and Dr. King had been assassinated in the 70s, late 70s, when I got engaged. 1787, United States Constitution. I'm going to publicly apologize for not being able to make it. We don't even love them. That's who we are. No other nation was founded the way we are. We hold these truths self-evident, that all men and women are created equal, endowed by their creator. No nation has ever been founded on that principle. That was a time in the late 60s, the early 60s and 60s where it was drop out, go to Haight-Ashbury. We can do this by making sure that we're in a position that we, in fact, allow people. Time's up. I agree that everybody, once they, in fact, they should. Anyway, my time's up. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Vice President.
But here's the deal, folks. You know, well, I think it shouldn't matter where your race. We have this notion that somehow if you're poor, you cannot do it. Poor kids are just as bright and just as talented as white kids.
How's it going, everybody? Sorry, I saw that quote coming, and I had to make sure you could hear it. Every time, because I always play this stupid, like, lo-fi Biden cringe compilation thing. Every time I fucking hear that, I just fucking wince. I cannot believe he actually said poor kids are just as smart as white kids.
You just fucking say
fucking
about
Christ.
little bit.
How's everyone doing? Sierra, thank you for the gift sub. Was there anyone? King Uendo, thank you for the 3 months. I think that's it for now. How's everybody doing? Once again, we are back. I took yesterday off because I usually do. I hope everyone is having, all the American viewers are having a great Thanksgiving. Dino Nugs, thank you for the 2 months. Liv posting lo-fi track, yeah. I hope you're having a Thanksgiving. I'm Canadian again, so I don't have Thanksgiving now. It was a month and a half ago because like our harvest is earlier than your guys's because we're more north or something. I don't know. Yeah. So the only thing that I'm looking forward to is for Cyber Monday stuff to start. And all that. I'm pretty sure there are sales already. I need to look because I'm getting a new computer because all the parts will be cheaper. So that's fun. That's exciting. Maybe I'll do some computer build streams in the near future. I'm also like actually getting through Das Kapital Volume 1. Like I'm actually reading through all of it because like I've read sections of it and I understand, you know, the vague points in relation to bad cops, commodities and value, etc. Hey Scully, it's me. Thank you for the 5 months. But yeah, it's very dense and nice. I like reading it. It's a nice read. I'm still on fucking chapter 1 because it's the hardest chapter. Like I know Althusser literally when he was like teaching Capital told his students to just skip chapter 1 because it's so technical. But I looked at some like introductory texts and I think I'm well equipped enough. Volume 1 audiobook. Could you? I couldn't imagine reading this with an audiobook. Like I have to read over the sentences so many times. I mean, I guess you get like a vague understanding. Maybe audiobook is good for like a reread. But yeah. I realized like I got it on Amazon, it's super funny. Like it's like volume 1 and 2, so it's fucking huge. But it was like $8 and it was like on Prime. Which is super funny that like this is the stage of capitalism we're in, that like Jeff Bezos is like, yeah, we'll get $8 for volume 2. Sure, fucking for the first and the second volume. Sure, buy it. Um, get it. I don't care. Yeah, widely accessible. You can have it in a day. I don't give a fuck because no one reads. No one. It doesn't matter. Um, which you could also say it's the Lenin quote about the rope. The capitalist sells you the rope. We hang him on or whatever. But I think I have a more cynical interpretation of that. Um, yeah, which is rough. But I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't be cynical. What's been going on? I'm also at like 6 p.m. Pacific time, so in like 4 or so hours, I'm going on the QAA Twitch stream. So I will not be streaming for I guess as long as no, and we're gonna talk about some like funny Thanksgiving stuff. So that should also be fun. So I'll make sure to send you guys there when I do that. And also, if you have any specific Thanksgiving related videos, well, it's not sad because I'll just be streaming more. You just have to watch it on the QAnon Anonymous stream. Um, but yeah, there's a couple things I have set up that are unrelated to Thanksgiving, I guess specifically, um, that we can watch. Yeah, it's more streaming. It's not Sag. I'm streaming more proportionally. It's just some of it isn't on here. Um, JP is back. Mr. Peterson has survived. He's gone through the gauntlet, which I guess the gauntlet is quitting benzos cold turkey and then getting coronavirus in Serbia. And he is now he has another book. This time I guess it's about why order is bad, because his first one is about why chaos is bad, which is super funny because it's like the point is that order is masculine and chaos is feminine. So he has to like I don't even know why he isn't just totally embracing the idea that order is good and chaos is bad, because that seems like if you have a discussion with the Jordan Peterson fan, that's what they think. Yeah, I mean, fuck it, chaos is cool, I guess. But also chaos is like totalitarian. I don't. It's sort of. He's a very confused man. But we can watch some Jordan Peterson videos because they're funny.
The Labour Party.
Yes, I literally have this read up. Thank you for sending me that. We can look at that first. This is more some British politics in it. Both the Brits and Canadians, of course, do not have Thanksgiving.
The Labour.
Or don't have Thanksgiving now. The Brits don't have Thanksgiving in general because Thanksgiving is sort of related to like celebrating genocide, or at least that's how it began.
Labour Party bureaucracy, allied with Keir Starmer, is using every dirty trick available.
This is oh, actually, before I get into this, I need to show you guys. I tweeted about this. It's the funniest tweet I've ever seen. Not like DHS spent millions on surveillance of anarchists in Portland to only amass a giant file of who's canceling whom on Twitter. Key points. Organizing happens on the ground in IRL, not online. So I'm right, of course. This is very funny though. It's very, very funny. Very good stuff. Yeah, obviously it's not top-down hierarchical insurrection. It's purely like spontaneous. So, the DHS was as online as fucking like posters, and thought that like the online realm was an area in which left-wingers like actually organize protests, and it isn't. Literally, and the DHS is doing my work for me in a sense. Don't clip that out of context. To spend millions of dollars like surveying online left spaces to see like clipped and shipped, fuck. And to find any empirical connection between actual organizing and left-wing posting, and they couldn't find anything. I mean, it's very funny, and also like I'm right. Which is to say, I guess the only praxis that left-wing posting has is convincing like the opponents of far left political programs that it actually is relevant, and so they waste their time. But the obvious difference to that, because one of the responses when I say the posting is in praxis and that you need to like do politics in the real world and not online, and that there is like a very stark actual divide, more than there is a connection between left-wing activity and like real life activity. Um, the main response is like, well, aren't you obsessed with like QAnon, like right wing stuff? And isn't that, and you say that like QAnon is dangerous. One of the reasons for that is because like right wingers can totally use the spectacle to their advantage, especially because they have a right winger in power, and meaningfully are pressuring sort of centrist institutions to go back to be more reactionary. Um, the spectacle works excellently for them in their political program. The thing about the left is that it has to be sincere. Is that cynicism among the left is actually like one of the most poisonous sort of like inner factors that lead to the destruction of any meaningful left wing movements. Um, so there's a very stark difference in multiple cases, but I mean this sort of proves that connection there. And to some extent, you could also say that like QAnon stuff doesn't inspire mass insurrection, but that right wingers don't need mass insurrection to get their political programs. They don't. So yeah, this is very funny, and also I'm right, and people who disagree with me are wrong. Anyways, we can look at this now.
To stop Labour members exercising their democratic right to defend Jeremy Corbyn. 39 constituency Labour parties have passed motions in solidarity with Jeremy Corbyn and called for the whip to be reinstated.
That's
At least
awesome.
17 more have tried but have had the motion ruled out of order. That means someone's told them, you're not even allowed to debate this. You can't discuss this. We have also tonight got an exclusive email which was leaked to us, showing the party are committed to preventing anyone debating Starmer's highly political decision to override the ruling of an NEC panel and withdraw the whip from Jeremy Corbyn. So when this was in the disciplinary phase, when Jeremy Corbyn was in the official disciplinary channels within the Labour Party, they were telling CLPs, local Labour parties, you can't discuss this suspension because this is within the disciplinary process, and that shouldn't be politicised. Now, because Jeremy Corbyn is not in the formal disciplinary process. He's had the whip removed by Keir Starmer, a political act, explicitly political act. They've had to come up with more excuses, different excuses, more novel excuses to silence ordinary Labour Party members. Let's go to this email to see what line they are pushing at the moment to try and shut up Labour members who are saying things that the leadership don't necessarily like. So this is an email from the head of internal governance to all regional directors sent today. We are aware that there are a lot of questions incoming around what motions may or may not be in order given developments over recent days. To confirm, the Labour Party disciplinary case against the former leader has now concluded. However, it has become clear that motions around this issue, including expressions of solidarity, views around the ongoing process in relation to the parliamentary whip, and or the power of the General Secretary or the NEC to issue guidance in relation to discussion of this issue, are providing a flashpoint for the expression of views that undermine the Labour Party's ability to provide a safe and welcoming space for all members, in particular our Jewish members. Therefore, all motions which touch on these issues must be ruled out of order. Later in the email, it goes on, finally, as we have previously advised, we will not hesitate to take appropriate action, including against individual members where our rules and guidance are not adhered to or standards of behaviour fall below that which we expect. We will
Labour, you should be.
We'll be reinforcing this message via an email to CLPs in the next day or two.
This is rough.
It's from Fraser Welsh, who is head of internal governance. So that's been sent out to regional directors. It will go out to CLPs.
It feels like that email feels like, and I guess they are literally leaking it, but it feels like this weird democratic centralism thing, right? Where it's like, the party has the party has decided about like what's going on here, and now it cannot be debated.
CLPs, but it'll be regional directors who are enforcing this kind of thing, because as we've seen around the country, there are many CLP chairs and secretaries who do want to be debating.
Navarro advising people to stay in the party. I mean, yes, if you are like an electoralist, you have to do that. If your solution is like electoral reform,
motions to.
Then what else? You make a new party? No, you gotta fight like it's an internal war in the Labour Party. That's
express their solidarity with Jeremy Corbyn.
That's not what explain to me what democratic centralism is practically.
Corbyn getting
Insofar as like it actually had an effect in the
a bunch
Soviet
of them
Union.
suspended. You'll see in Bristol West, which is one of the biggest CLPs in the country, you've had the co-secretaries, the chairs suspended for allowing a motion about Jeremy Corbyn to go forward. And now
Centralism is we have a vote about a thing. We all had a vote, and this was the party line that we've decided, and now you can't debate it. If you are a member of the party and you represent the party, you're not allowed to. You have to talk on party line.
now they're banned from having
I know that like Clara Aloe Vera, I believe is still her Twitch name, was like a member of the Canadian Communist Party for a while, like representing them in the election. And in the Canadian, because of democratic centralism, on the Canadian Communist Party's like platform was not recognizing. You can still debate the party. Well, maybe fucking the Canadian Communist Party isn't democratically centralist enough. Because on the Canadian, you can still debate the party line. You must adhere to it. Those are two antithetical ideas. She wasn't allowed to say that when she was a Canadian Communist Party politician, she wasn't allowed to say that Canada was a settler state, because all of the old Canadian boomers who run the Canadian Communist Party did not recognize Canada as a settler state, and when the younger members tried to put it up to like a referendum to change the party line, they blocked it. And so as a politician, she literally was not allowed to recognize Canada as a settler state. It's why she left for the most part.
having meetings until February. Really, really authoritarian maneuvers here. I want
But in practice, you must adhere to it. That's
to focus though on what's
okay. Then the thing I said
in
was
this email,
correct.
because you know we've talked before about how the Labour Party approach to
And I mean, also in practicality, what does that happen? Where does that lead to? Is so you're saying the Canadian Communist Party are bad democratic centralists? Because the practical effects of democratic centralism is that that's what you got to do.
this has been
You can't.
really ad hoc. They've basically made up rules as they
That's your opinion now.
go along when they want to avoid outcomes they don't like. The outcome they don't want here is members expressing
And you know,
their
in a large scale party bureaucracy, like one of the main things that happens is that it's harder for it to be authentically democratic, the party line. And you know,
solidarity with
it's usually and you can see this in the Canadian Communist Party as well, that the people who decide what the party line is and have an effect on it are usually like those in the
Corbyn.
higher up
Keir Starmer has
positions.
made a very political decision to suspend the whip from him. That's basically it seems to appease people within the Labour Party and also avoid awkward headlines. I don't know what he's trying to do. Basically, we're going to go on to what the whip is asking Jeremy Corbyn to do in a moment. Equally ridiculous. But what they are trying to do is shut up people from expressing any dissent, and they're using any excuse possible. So before, as I said, when this was in the disciplinary processes, they were saying you can't debate this because it's a disciplinary matter. Now they're saying you can't
Althazar
debate...
and the left of the PCF waged a line struggle against the revisionists within the party. And how did that go? How'd that go, practically? Did they win?
this because possibly if you were to debate this, someone might say something which makes someone else feel uncomfortable. So people are now being
Corbyn grad,
sort of
thank you for the
banned
7
from
months.
speaking about something because of what might potentially be said. You know, people aren't being punished for things they've said. People are being prevented from having a conversation because of what might possibly be said. You know, now this is really Orwellian. If you get to rule out and ban anyone hearing emotions where they judge that someone might possibly say something which is offensive, then we're in very, very worrying territory. Especially when, you know,
Yeah, the
Keir
Labour
Starmer,
Party
all
is
of
really cucked.
these Labour MPs, they've had every opportunity to have their voice heard when they go on the radio and say, no, I completely support his whip being removed, blah, 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 blah. Members don't normally get invited onto LBC. They don't get invited onto the Today programme on Radio 4. The only way they can express their opinions is through, and be heard, is through the democratic structures of the Labour Party. So basically you're saying Keir Starmer is allowed an opinion, Margaret Hodge is allowed an opinion. All of the Labour front bench are allowed an opinion. But if you, a lowly member, want to have an opinion on the suspension of the former Labour leader, well, you're not allowed. We might even suspend you.
Yeah,
if
this
you
is
try.
rough. I don't know. Again, I don't know how you could look at this shit. I mean, I guess if you're an electoralist, you have to use the Labour Party. You have to win the battle, because there still clearly are Corbynites in the party, which is, I'm assuming, what the Novara position is. but it feels so cucked. I mean, I guess having no support or no party at all is also cucked.
That's the situation with local parties. We're also in a pretty dark situation when it comes to other bodies, other democratic bodies within the Labour Party. Young Labour.
I would also say there's some discussion about whether like QAnon actually has an effect, and the response of like it being purely online is that there are 2 senators. I would also say that like with a lot of QAnon stuff, it like in some ways works with the Republican Party to the point in which Republicans aren't like, is the American or is the British Green Party good at all? I don't know. Green parties are usually not very good. They usually have oddly centrist politics. Same with the Canadian. But it seems like for QAnon people, again, this is why like QAnon and like right wing online stuff is far more infectious than left wing stuff in terms of like actual practical real politics, is because like it can be integrated into the Republican Party apparatus and made sense of, whereas like communists can't in the Democratic Party, because there's something very unique to far left politics that like makes that much more difficult. Is one of multiple reasons why like
for example, that's the official party organ for those under 27. So this Saturday, the democratically elected Committee for Young Labour agreed a statement in support of Corbyn, which they released on Twitter. We can take a look at that. So they write, thousands of young people were inspired to join and support our movement by Jeremy
all the
Corbyn
good Greens
in a
joined
world with
Corbyn
few
Labour, now
politicians
the
like
Greens are
him.
libs.
The removal of the whip, despite the lifting of Jeremy's suspension, is a betrayal of them and blatant factional interference in disciplinary matters. Instead of disregarding due process, Keir Starmer should immediately reinstate the whip and end these attacks on the left so that we can get on with the task of delivering a
Welcome Jeffrey Epstein 11 to our community. All your account has been banned in one channel,
socialist
including
Labour
Bad Bunny.
government to transform this country.
Well,
This move
Jeffrey,
distracts from the
I'm glad
important
there's confirmation that you're
findings of
alive.
the EHRC report from
'Cause
the
I knew
critical
it.
work of tackling
I knew-
anti-Semitism within the party.
I knew that photo of you being, pushed out on a stretcher after you died in the prison had a different ear shape than actual Epstein.
And violates a key recommendation of the EHRC report that disciplinary matters must be free from political interference. Now, those tweets, all very reasonable, were posted by Jess Barnard. She is a Norfolk County Councillor and a youth worker. She is also chair of Young Labour. She's been a member of the Young Labour Committee for 4 years, but was recently elected in a OMOV ballot, 1 member, 1 vote to all young members. She was elected by an overwhelming margin to become its chair. I spoke to her earlier today to ask what happened.
Well, this doesn't even
after
feel
Young
like. I mean, I guess it is factionalism, but it's sort of a thing of like it feels like Corbyn Labour should be its own party, and then like Blairites should just join the Lib Dems.
Labour posted those tweets.
On the Monday, I received an email from the party letting me know that the statement needed to come down immediately, and alleged that we were using or misusing Labour Party branding to talk about a factional or disciplinary issue. Obviously, I followed that up with the party and I challenged that, and I do, following my statement, obviously feel quite uncomfortable being asked to override the votes of the committee and to withhold their right to make statements on political issues within the party. I have responded to the party with about a series of 10 questions, asking them to clarify where this rule
is there a massive general strike in India? Well, I mean, what you can also see with somewhere like India is that their labor movement is far more like equivalent to like, I don't know, like the working class of the 40s. A majority of laborers are not like sort of stratified into the weird labor hierarchy that we see in the global north. 200 million people, and it still is the case that like most working class people are part of this sort of semi-skilled labor pool that is sort of moved around based on the market and market forces, and work for nothing, work for there's a very interesting idea in Capital that I didn't realize that I think is quite interesting, and how Marx phrases it, is that there's this constant war between the worker and the bourgeois in relation to what subsistence living is defined as, where where the worker attempts to, you know, during like some period like this where these massive general strikes, or like when there are when the workers have some sort of power, they get to negotiate more like less proportional exploitation in their work time, like they get paid more essentially, and therefore are able to afford things that they typically weren't able to afford. So, you know, some of this is in the historically speaking, like we're making enough money that you don't have to send your children to work in like factories, for instance, or like having enough to like meaningfully feed your family, or like secure rent, you know, these types of things. And that after that, what the workers attempt to do is define that new income as what actually defines subsistence and the base level. Whereas what the capitalist attempts to do is to work down subsistence. You can see this with like people who say that minimum wage should be a living wage. That like a living wage is what is subsistence, and how we should define subsistence. And there's this sort of constant war, and what you can see in like India, for instance, with how abysmally low their like income is, or their minimum wage is that subsistence is what is defined as subsistence is incredibly low. And as a result of that, you can probably imagine why there is a general strike that has 200 million people participating. Nationwide strike is affecting the daily life of 24-hour bans began at 6 a.m. and is expected to observe participation from over 25 crore workers. Banking operations across the country will be hit, as some bank unions will be joining. The union representatives say Tamil Nadu and Kerala have been affected the most due to the agitation as unions. Oh, of course. I don't know about Tamil. I know that Kerala is like, there's a shit ton of communists in like local level and state level government. Auto and taxi drivers have decided to keep off the roads. 10 trade unions that are part of the nationwide strike. Oh yeah, that's a lot of trade unions. Unions have asked the Senate to provide 200 days work in a year at enhanced wages. Withdrawal of anti-farmer and anti-worker labor codes. Scrapping of the national pension system. Restoring of the earlier pension scheme. So again, you know, it's in one Corolla. Sorry. You can see, like, you know, this newer pension scheme is the bourgeois class attempting to redefine subsistence, and what we see with this and the demands of the trade unions is to define subsistence up, to say no, the previous pension scheme is actually what we need to live off of. Yeah, that's awesome. If there are any videos on this, please let me know. Yeah, because what we see in like industrializing states, especially like India, is like a capacity for a labor movement and a workers movement, especially given the population. And during the process of industrialization, that is like, even it's a defensive strike. Yeah, that makes sense. Is probably the potential for something more militant than even like probably the strikes in America. Although, you know, maybe I don't understand the Indian situation as much as I admittedly should. Modi's reforms could force farmers off their land. Oh, the Michael Flynn shit. Of course, we have to talk about Michael Flynn.
And you know what they're reliant upon, based on saying that we can't use Labour Party branding to make political statements.
I'm pronouncing it wrong.
I don't think it's fair to say that this is a factional issue. I think it's an issue of democracy, and there really isn't any precedent for the party.
I mean, this is, by the way, this is just like America or Britain's gonna have a fucking conservative government for like 10 years or something. Start legal action over the suspension of the labor whip. He would lose an immense amount of trust. If property was an issue in British political life, it would be a resigning matter. It isn't. It's about honor and integrity, which is internal party politics. Internal party politics are usually about honor and integrity and that type of thing.
To intervene in this way, and of course we look at like European youth wings of political parties, they often really politically differ from the main party, but the party respects that and respects the autonomy.
Don't remember
So
the last
party
time a politician was forced to resign? Brexit. What the fuck is his name? The British Prime Minister, like 6 years ago. Was it 6 years? I can't even fucking remember. How long was Brexit? Not 6
hasn't
years.
referred to any rules that Young Labour has broken.
I mean, he wasn't forced to resign. I guess he willingly did. But like, Cameron, I guess he wasn't forced to resign, but you know.
I don't believe that Young Labour has broken any rules.
Maybe it's different.
And whether
I guess
you
it is
agree or
different.
disagree with the statement or
Was it
not,
2016?
it's a matter of democracy and a matter of the rights of young members to have a committee that can vote on political issues and represent them autonomously. With the leadership we've seen at the moment, there is just no way of knowing what the next steps are. I've made it really clear that I won't be overriding the committee. I think it would be completely undemocratic for me to do that, and the mandate
Theresa
that
May
young
resigned,
members have
but it
given
was more
me,
she
the
decided
platform
to.
I stood on was on one that would fight for an autonomous and democratic socialist Young Labour. I was really clear about that throughout the 4-month campaign that we went through, and so morally, like, I can't override this. There isn't any rules that we've broken. I've not had a response from the Labour Party. So I'm really not sure what the next steps are, because we need to have a functioning relationship with the party. We need to be able to work together. We all want to see a Labour government, but the party needs to respect our right to make political statements. We aren't just a mouthpiece for Lotto's office. We are a collection of young members who are really passionate about putting a transformative Labour government
I mean,
in.
the only chance Labour has of winning any fucking election in the foreseeable future is literally if Corbyn takes back the party, because these fucking Blairite centrists are so incompetent, as can seen by like removing Corbyn. It looks so fucking bad. How stupid do you have to be? Like the Starmer was on Corbyn's fucking, was like a part of his shadow cabinet.
Power, and so
like you're kicking him out of your party because it's like he is an anti-Semite, but also like I was willing to work for his government and I was rooting for him to win.
I'm sure
that doesn't
the
make sense.
committee will be continuing to fight for that, and that we will continue, as is our right, to be political and to organise young members and to build the structures that they deserve. But obviously, as we can see, it's going to be an uphill struggle for us to do that, but we are going to have to just pull together. And the solidarity we've had from members across the party, both young and older, has been overwhelming. So I think it's clear people really do want a Young Labour that is autonomous, even if they disagree with statements that are put out.
That was Jess Barnard, the chair of Young Labour.
I mean, a lot of this is also just like Corbyn didn't purge enough people in the Labour Party. I mean, the fact, again, that Starmer was like a part of his government, you know. Starmer was elected because people thought he and Corbyn were cool with each other. Yeah, I mean, Corbyn didn't really purge anyone.
She was emailed by bureaucrats in party HQ to say, take down your tweets. She refused. She put up a public statement to say, this is what happened. This is why I'm not going to delete them. I have every right to do this.
Queen.
There are people in CLPs across the country.
I mean, they're
going
to kick her out of the party, aren't they? That's how that works. But, you know, respect.
Ash, I want to bring you in on this. I mean, who could have imagined, you know, when Keir Starmer got elected on that platform of, I believe in unity within the Labour Party, that what he would have done within 6 months of inheriting a party with 550,000 members, he would have first suspended the whip from the previous leader, and then basically used every method he possibly can to ban anyone from complaining about it. He's basically shutting down any particular organ of the party that wants to protest this, I mean, what is overtly a political move.
Who could have imagined?
I did think that this was something that was going to happen. I didn't have the kind of optimism for Keir Starmer's leadership that I know that many other people did. And I'm not just talking about people who voted for Keir Starmer. I know people who were very heavily invested in Rebecca Long-Bailey's campaign. But when Keir won with 10 pledges, which promised that he would stick to Corbyn's economic policy, but there would be a change in leadership style and emphasis on professionalising the party outfit. There are lots of people who went, well, you know what, that sounds really good. I'm willing to have the left be a junior partner in a Labour leadership which is sort of led by broadly soft left principles. And the reason why I didn't feel all that optimistic is that one.
Oh yeah, I mean, unity is a dog whistle for centrist anti-leftist people. Yeah, I mean, look, when the libs are in control of a party, they try to destroy the left, and they say it's unity. And then when the as we can see with Corbyn, when the left, any meaningful semblance of a left is in charge of the party, what do the libs do? They sabotage them. So, you know, think of that the next time someone tells you you have to support a centrist because of unity. Think about what they would be doing if you were in charge of the party that you're vying for control over.
I think that Keir Starmer has always been something of he's quite a ruthless political operator. He knew what it would take to become Labour Party leader. I think that he pursued that goal since 2015. And I'm not saying that as a derogatory thing at all. I'm saying that those were his goals and he achieved them. One of the ways in which he achieved them.
One of the things, and you know, I agree with her, but it is funny to think like when you insult someone, you're like, look, it's not an insult. I'm just objectively speaking. He is like a tyrant who wanted political power. I'm just like, it's not, you know, look, it's not even, it's just objective. I'm sorry.
Is by moving
and you know what? I agree.
Towards a much more Remain and pro-second referendum position that gave him a certain standing.
Yeah, I mean, they crushed Bernie. They demanded unity. That was the discussion about like, would Bernie have won even? Like, would the centrists have just like crushed him? Which, you know, is the fun, you know, that fundamentally the argument that Bernie would have won is structured on if Bernie didn't lose, he would have won. Which, you know, doesn't, when you say it like that, it doesn't really make sense because he didn't win, and there's a very specific reason he didn't win. That probably affects the general election. I still think he would have won the general. I doubt that. Especially given how much Biden won by, because it wasn't close. The election was not close. It sort of looked close initially, but it wasn't. I mean, he won Georgia, for God's sake. Like, Trump ate shit. Probably mainly because of the pandemic, but nevertheless, that shows me that Bernie still would have won, even with the minor sort of sabotaging of the centrists.
A very pro-Remain membership. And I don't think that there was going to be a Keir Starmer who would stop there. He doesn't just want to be a leader of the Labour Party. He wants to be Prime Minister. He thinks, well, what does the country like and what does it dislike? Well, it really dislikes Jeremy Corbyn. So I'm not going to make it.
Oh, fuck. I forgot that fucking Paul Joseph Watson, you know, this tweet. He's British. He's British. He doesn't have Thanksgiving. He doesn't even have it. What are you doing? This is disgusting, of course. Jesus Christ.
A line in the sand for my leadership to treat this man who was my predecessor in a way which is fair. I also think that Keir Starmer feels, and this is me completely speculating here, but bolstered by words in my ears from some well-placed sources. I think that he feels a sense of frustration that the anti-Semitism issue is continuing to dog his leadership, despite him, you know, not being Jeremy Corbyn. And he hasn't prepared for that. He hasn't prepared for that one bit, and I think that he really underestimated.
Corbyn is Corbyn isn't really an anti-royalist. I mean, it is funny. There was always a pejorative for like the British Labour Party, at least when they explicitly were pretending, or at least promising that they would seize the means of production if they got, you know, elected, which is to call them like Red Royals, which is a pejorative because it's like
to which
your party platform is in a system.
Anti-Semitism as a
PJW,
wedge issue would be wielded against him, right? He wouldn't be allowed.
Canada has Thanksgiving, and we're royalists, so you know,
to move on from the issue unless authoritarian, quite brutal action was taken.
I don't believe that all white suburban voters would have swung Dem. Well, yeah, it would have been the opposite. It would have been marginalized people that voted. And yeah, I think the difference is enough that, you know, Bernie wins. even if he loses Florida because, you know.
Taken to marginalize or indeed exclude the left from his party. And I think that the signs of this were kind of always there. I think when it comes to Labour Party democracy, one of the things that Jess said is, you know, it's not a factional issue, it's an issue of democracy. Unfortunately, the history of the Labour Party shows that any attempt to democratise the party is itself a factional issue, because you have a parliamentary
Salmon
Labour
and, like,
Party and also a
what is
party
that,
machinery,
mozzarella?
which
It's
is not
disgusting.
representative of the views of its membership. You have a parliamentary Labour Party and a staffing culture which is significantly to the right of its membership.
Has Corbyn been at any point? Literally, the commission that they're using as evidence to kick Corbyn off explicitly said that Corbyn himself was not anti-Semitic.
Any attempt to empower that membership, whether it's a youth wing or whether it's CLPs, is going to be met with factional resistance, because it is in itself a weakening.
Yes, also, most hardcore Democrats would have voted Bernie still. It's all of the party apparatus hated Bernie, but like most of the voters didn't really care. There was a lot of cases in the primary where, like, you know, the second choice for Amy Klobuchar voters was Bernie Sanders, and you're like, what the fuck? How could that be the case? Aren't Amy Klobuchar supporters like? But the reason for that is just because the average Dem voter was just like, yeah, you know, Amy Klobuchar, she's nice, but you know, Bernie seems also cool. He seems authentic. Same with Pete Buttigieg, yeah, and a lot of, and like Biden, literally Biden as well. They believe vote blue no matter who. I think they genuinely do. And for that reason, I think it's slightly different than Corbyn and Corbyn getting sabotaged.
Of a particular faction's power. So that's one thing where I do disagree a bit. As for whether, you know, where this is going to go, I think that Keir Starmer strategically is ended up in a bit of a cul-de-sac, and I think that is because he underestimated the extent to which anti-Semitism would become a test for him, a test for whether he would be subject to factional attacks or not. And he's hemmed in by the fact that the left is in a much stronger position now than it used to be, in terms of the membership, in terms of parliamentary representation, in terms of places on the NEC.
Oh yeah, Corbyn like really lost because of Brexit. That was the main reason. People resounded more with the incredibly stupid but simple conservative position of like, oi bruv, we're getting Brexit done, innit? It's quite simple, bruv.
You know, getting rid of Jeremy Corbyn is not going to be any easy feat, as we've seen in the last few days. There is still a way out of this, and I think it's by climbing down from the position where you judge whether or not the party is institutionally anti-Semitic by whether or not one man is in it. And I think that this has been a core of the problem. People use the word institutional with regards to racism, not in its actual meaning. They're not actually interested in the kind of process or institutional culture which produces unequal outcomes, right? And that's what institutional racism means. That was its meaning in the McPherson report.
That's a good point, where it's like libs think that institutional racism is solved by like convincing people that racism is bad. And just like seeing a racist person and kicking them out of like, you know, position of power. Like that's how you solve racism for libs. It's like still an individual problem. And that's why they thought it was a legible concept to just kick Corbyn out. Like if it is institutionally anti-Semitic, we just kick out the individual that was causing that institutional problem, which is Corbyn.
What they're using institutional racism to mean in this case, in the case of the Labour Party anti-Semitism and Jeremy Corbyn, is does the Labour Party as an institution think that Jeremy Corbyn has a home here? Because as long as he does, it will be judged to be institutionally anti-Semitic. And the word institutional there basically just means big, just means bigly racist.
Yeah.
And that's
just
obviously
means a lot of
completely
racism.
Untenable. Because you've got an EHRC report which identified problems with procedure and problems with rules. Point. And now you've got a test of whether or not it's institutionally anti-Semitic in the court of public opinion, and also amongst the Labour Party right, and amongst you know, the Jewish community leadership, the Board of Deputies, you know, being one, which says that, well, the rules will be deemed to fail for as long as they allow Jeremy Corbyn to be here. And you can't just rewrite rules to get rid of one person. Completely untenable. It's going to be
What did you have for Thanksgiving? I can't remember. It was a month and a half ago.
Kind of death by 1,000 cuts for Keir Starmer's own moral authority and his leadership. The best thing he can do is actually
I mean, what I had is my thankfulness because I'm able to vote.
Down for some
because I vote.
These really impossible tests that have been set for him and that
I'm
he's set for
voting.
himself.
Okay, that was a great video. Follow Navarra if you don't already. Yeah, I'm Canadian. We had our Thanksgiving a while ago. Yes, it's white fragility style understanding of institutional racism, which is just like, well, we need a class to explain to white people why racism is bad. That's how you solve it. What can we watch? You guys want to watch some Jordan freaking Peterson? We won't watch all this, and I'll speed it up. But there's also this really good video. Cause he's back, baby. He's back. Jordan mother freaking Peterson is back from his like benzo treatment and coronavirus thing in I finally my symbolic father Jordan Peterson can finally tell me what I should do.
Man, that's a lot of Australian.
Yeah, Jordan Peterson only adds 2 rules. Just very yikes moment when Jordan Peterson releases 14 rules for
Well, thank you very much
for
for
life.
coming out. It's really quite something to see all of you here. As Dave said, this is the largest venue that we've spoken at. I had a
I'm sure
debate in
Australians
Paris,
love
one in
him.
Dublin and one in London that were in larger venues. But as far as
yeah, that's
speaking
basically
about 12
Peterson.
rules, this is damn near twice as big as the next biggest auditorium. I think we were at the Apollo in London, and it held 3,000.
I honestly, because there's a situation, because his book is getting published by Penguin Books, which, you know, Penguin Books is looking to be like the sort of hegemonic, monopolistic figure in book publishing at this point. And the Canadian branch, there were like employees that were like crying and breaking down at the idea that like their holy book company would publish his stupid books. And honestly, I think that is stupid, because it's just, honestly, what Peterson represents is just self-help guru bullshit. And maybe I need to read his book to understand how dangerous it is, but my understanding is that for the most part, it's just like it does the same thing that like reading The Secret does.
People, and so that was good. But this is,
you know,
this is really something. There must be quite a dearth of things to do.
The amount that I view Peterson, at least his book, is a particular threat. I don't know. Maybe I'm underselling that, but like,
no, seriously though,
it seems just like something you shouldn't pay attention about.
To engage in what I believe to be fundamentally a serious conversation.
No, I don't think that The Secret is for people who want to do critical philosophy.
Psychological,
but it is for people who do not want to do critical philosophy.
Philosophical and perhaps certainly ethical, perhaps even religious issues. And you know, who would have ever guessed that there was a mass market for that? You know, so
who would have guessed?
And apparently there is. And maybe we're smarter than we think we are. And I have a suspicion that might be the case. One of the things that I've noticed about
it is so he's such a fucking narcissist that his book selling well is like, well, I guess people are really smart. Didn't think about that.
The intellectual dark web types, you know, that's a name that Eric Weinstein, you might be familiar with him, came up with. And it wasn't like we all got together and built a little fort out in our backyard and, you know, called it the intellectual dark web.
Which is also to say, one of the reasons why it sold well is because of the culture it's selling in. You know, it's like this weird sort of trad. Is it trad? Is that a good explanation? Almost man going your own way, red pill stuff, just like coded in the language of self-help.
Coined the term,
and there are a lot of just like sad fucking right-wing incels that need a self-help book for them to be able to, like, you know, get caught into that, you know, new age, you know, The Secret bullshit. and they think it helps
people
them,
were
and that's
included for one reason or
what
another.
happens.
And I've spent a fair bit of time trying to
I don't know.
understand
There's
why
a crisis
the
of
coinage stuck
masculinity.
and what it might be that unites.
You need like a self-help guru to explain to you why self-help is good, but also that you're not a pussy, because most of the self-help shit is coded as like feminine for a lot of like Jordan Peterson supporters. That's basically what it is.
This very strangely diverse range of people, and I think it's really three things. One is that each of them.
Oh
from
no!
Joe Rogan
The point is that The Secret is stupid. It's just
Shapiro,
that the people who like Peterson get the same thing that the people who read The Secret get from it, which is, you have to visualize a goal and then it manifests itself. There's a really funny Dave Chappelle bit about The Secret, where it's like, you're explaining to like a starving African that he just has to like visualize food or whatever. That like it's an absurd way of going about the world.
the same with
That is immaterial and only possible if you're like very privileged.
Sam Harris, are all people. Dave are all people.
But there's a lot of very privileged people that like don't vibe with the way that The Secret is, articulating that sentiment. And they need like a hyper, or it's funny to describe Peterson as he exists as like a hyper masculine guy, but someone who's perceived as hyper masculine to like tell them
independent media platforms, right? They're not part of a corporate structure.
Did Elliot Rodger read The Secret? That's really interesting. I wouldn't have expected that. Maybe it isn't antithetical with The Secret necessarily.
Beholden to anyone. They're financially independent. And they built that themselves, and so they can say what they want, and so that's kind of cool to see that happening, to see the technology that enables online video, which is really a complex form of broadcasting.
Which is also just to say that like you shouldn't fucking cry if you work for Penguin Publishing. First off, you shouldn't be proud of your fucking stupid monopolistic hegemonic publishing company. You shouldn't cry that Jordan Peterson is being published through your book company. It's not
podcast, which is a complex form of radio.
Because again, for the most part, it's just self-help bullshit, and that's not worth crying over. There's a lot of other things that are in society that are worth crying over.
Enable that sort of independent journalism, and to see people able to
So Penguin just bought Simon & Schuster, didn't they?
Make use of it. That's a very good thing.
That's how that works.
I'm thinking that might be a real positive outcome of the social media revolution. I mean, there's lots of downsides. I think Twitter is a downside. It's a pretty rough platform, and the commentary on social media platforms can be pretty brutal. We really haven't figured out how to regulate it well yet, so that it's civilized, not so that it's censored, right? Because that's a mistake.
Oh, of course not. That's not censoring.
Aren't the same thing. Properly regulated is civilized, and we don't know how to do that. But
I mean, Jordan Peterson almost coming to the conclusion that civilization is predicated on like a massive system of force, that the only way you can actually develop like a material social surplus that you see in like beginning in like Mesopotamia and other early civilizations is through like a regime of force. That's what civilization is predicated on.
Podcasts have opened up a huge market for intellectual material in a manner that's never really
forcing
happened
people
before.
to stay in the
You're
same
also seeing
place.
this happen with
Forcing them to
audiobooks.
give some of
The
their
audiobook
production
market
to
has absolutely exploded in the last
state
5
apparatus.
years. About a third of books sold now are audiobooks. And so, and that seems to be because people, having become accustomed to podcasts, are downloading audiobooks and listening to them in their cars or when they're exercising or.
I don't think Dave Chappelle saying the N-word is TOS. I'm gonna assume that it isn't, because that'd be fucked up if it was.
That show is that people keep trying to give me advice. Cause I guess I'm in like depressing. You know, you be depressing and people be like trying to cheer you up.
Dave is so much funnier before he left. Like all of his recent shit hasn't been that good.
And then I in show
or
business.
not bad, but like, the standard he set before.
That's what made me so mad about it. So they'd be saying stupid. Hey Dave, look, I know that was a rough experience, and I can only imagine what you've been through. But
I guess this is after he left.
You just gotta hang in there, and what you gotta do is you just gotta keep your chin up. Just keep your chin up, Dave. Word. That's what I was doing. That's what I was doing wrong. My chin was too low. Shut the fuck up. It had nothing to do with my chin, nigga.
He's mid nowadays, shit, yeah.
Fuck is it? Keep your chin up.
I mean, it's still funny
What
to
kind of
me,
shit is
honestly.
this? See niggas walking around show business. Oh, I know. So, this girl I knew sent me a book called The Secret. She was like, listen,
This
David,
is
this is
all everything that's said in this you can say about 12 Rules for
gonna
Life.
help you. It's called The Secret. I was, I thought this, and I started reading the book, and I read like 5 pages of shit and threw it in the trash. I was fucking. I can't believe they sell this shit. Do you know what this bitch says the secret of life is? She said it was positive imagery. You gotta visualize the things you want to have
This is just
happen in
clean
your
your
life.
room.
Like, bitch, that's the secret of life to you? Then kill yourself.
Do not endorse. I do not endorse.
It's gotta mean more than that. Positive imagery. Bitch,
It's
fly
parody.
to Africa and telling them starving
Parody.
children that shit. What's wrong with you? I have not eaten in 5 days. What you need to do is visualize some roast beef and some mashed potatoes and gravy. Oh, please, bitch, you're killing me. Stop talking like that. No, 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 no. The problem is you have a bad attitude about starving to death.
Which is to say that like the Peterson thing of like don't look at politics, don't care about politics until you have your internal house in order, which is one of the central points of like Peterson's self-help stuff, is bullshit, because one of the reasons why your house is not in order is because of politics, is because of the political world. They can't be solved by cleaning
When
your
they're
room.
doing housework, or and it's one of the advantages of this new media type is that you have it on demand, and you can play it at your leisure, or when you're working, for that matter. And so, I have all sorts of working class guys come up and talk to me after the show, long haul truck drivers and those sorts of people who have a lot of time. Obviously they're concentrating on what they're doing, but they have spare time to listen, and they're listening to 3-hour Joe Rogan podcasts on all sorts of abstract subjects.
Imagine paying
and
tuition
my
as a
lectures as well.
professor.
And it's really something to see that happening. And so that's one element of the intellectual dark web that's interesting and tied in with the new media revolution, because it really is a revolution to have video on demand like that, and to have it so easy to produce, and to have it permanent, and to have it distributed everywhere in the world, and to have it subtitled in all sorts of different languages, and to have it essentially free of charge and able to be produced in a day or two. I mean, and then it's permanent like a book. It's really something new.
It's a revolution. Why
and
does
then
he
the same
like
with
it?
the audio version.
Isn't
And I
it
do
supposed
believe
to be
it
bad?
may be the case that more people can, like a lot of people are intimidated by books for all sorts of reasons. I mean, highly literate reading is a relatively rare skill. Like it's not overwhelmingly rare, but it's relatively rare. But listening, man, people can listen, And so all of a sudden this complicated information is available to people who can listen, and maybe that's 10 times as many people who are likely to read, or maybe it's 50 times as many people who are likely to read. So God only knows what the consequence of that is going to be. That could be a real education revolution, and hopefully we'll be smart enough to take advantage of that carefully over the next 10 years and find out if that is the case. And I'm optimistic about it, because one of the things that really is cool about the internet is that, if you want to learn something, you can pretty much type in your question, whatever it is, and
This
somebody
actually
will put up
relates
a
to
YouTube video.
the point I was talking about before about like why I can pay Jeff Bezos literally fucking like $8 Canadian and get this amount of marks sent to my house in 2 days, is because people pay attention less, and the sort of the spectacle of online shit is like overpowers people, and it makes it harder to
tells you how to do it. And, you might have to sort through 2 or 3 of them before you find someone who's done a
extreme marks to dollars ratio.
very high-level job of the explanation, but they've done it, and often, they run an ad maybe and monetize a little bit, but mostly I would say it's an altruistic gesture, and so that's really something. And the other thing the intellectual dark web people have in common is that, they're opinionated and fairly tough-minded, but more importantly, they don't think their audience is stupid. And that's really something, and I think they're right.
I love the idea that like Joe Rogan like when Joe Rogan talks about like fucking like whether a monkey could, whether like 3 monkeys could fight a tiger, and like how psychedelics was the beginning of language, the stone day, that he's like really paying a lot of homage to his audience's intelligence.
I'm not going to assume instantaneous.
You think a tiger would win against 3 apes? I don't think so. No, maybe 2, but not 3. No, 3 is the. Did I say monkey? Oh, okay. Yeah, which apes? All right, that's a good. I'm talking about like. Fuck, which. The ape wins. I guess it depends on like oh, hold on. Let's think. Let's think about this 1 second. What are the primary? I guess we are technically apes, aren't we? Not like a gorilla 3 would be like, it wouldn't be close. Maybe like what's it called? Yeah, we're one of the great apes. You're right. Maybe like, yeah, chimpanzees. That's probably what I'm thinking of. Yeah, like like three like wild chimpanzees. I feel like they could take a tiger. What do you think? You guys disagree? They're fucking brutal. Do you guys see that the thing on Oprah from like a long time ago about that like woman who survived like a chimpanzee attack? Anyways, moving on.
That's a consequence of something particularly moral about the people who make up that group. I think it is a testament to their faith in the essential nature, in the essential quality of human nature. But I also do think it's a reflection of the medium itself, because
60,
it's funny, when I step into a television studio now, like a classic television studio, which happens from time to time, and which is apparently going to happen with Australia's Q&A on the 25th, which should be quite interesting.
Gorilla versus leopard. Oh, well, the gorilla wins. The gorilla wins, clearly. Yeah, that's not even close.
Yeah, strangely enough, I'm actually looking forward to that, because I've been feeling a lot better recently. And so it'd be actually nice to have a conversation with a journalist when I wasn't feeling half dead. And to see
we should vote. We should vote on it. I'm about to vote. Who wins? 3 chimp. How do you spell chimpanzee? Tiger. Was it a tiger? Or was they saying a lion? Lion. Okay. 3 minutes. There we go.
That goes. So it'd be nice to have a conversation at one point when I was at the top of my game. And so I don't know if I'm at the top of my game right now, but I am definitely feeling a lot better than I have for a long time. So yeah, I'm really, thank God for that, man. It's
I mean, of course you are. You literally like went into a medically induced coma because you quit fucking benzos cold turkey.
Hopefully that will be reflected in some reasonable quality of discourse
I mean,
tonight.
Jesus Christ.
That's a tiny bit of wit, but we'll see how that goes.
Oh yeah, no, okay. So it does say that the gorilla wins against the leopard.
Television studio. It feels like 1975 in some sense.
We got some French in the chat. What's this?
Talking to isn't really there. They're really a speaking device for the corporation, and they have to be, because the corporation, which is running high expense, low bandwidth television, where every minute or every second is extraordinarily expensive, they can't really take risks. They can't have free-flowing conversations on the off chance that something goes
translated
wrong,
to French,
and it might, right? And so everything is scripted, and then you have 30 seconds to make your point, and like there's just some things you can't say in 30 seconds. You have to compress them down to the point where they're actually foolish. It's actually foolish to try to do it, but what else do you have?
Izakai's passed it from France. That's awesome.
Man, you can actually have a discussion about something. You can try to get to the bottom of it, and so that's pretty cool. And then it turns out that people will actually follow along. Like I was actually absolutely stunned by. I had 4 debates with Sam Harris earlier this year, 2 in Vancouver and 1 in Dublin and 1 in London, and each of them lasted about 3 hours. And we were going to do a Q&A for each of them.
Oh my fucking God! Because I live in Vancouver. Just thinking about ironically going to one of these, and then it's like it's 3 hours long. They're talking for 3.
As it turned out, while we were talking, we got into the conversation, and then we asked the audience to vote by clapping whether we should continue the conversation or move to the Q&A.
It's just
and
silence.
It was overwhelming majority of people wanted the conversation to continue, and so basically what happened was something approximating a 12 to 15
I'm in the fucking crowd, and I'm just screaming like, no, stop clapping.
hour continuous conversation about the relationship between facts and values of science and religion, and that's a fairly solid philosophical discussion, and that isn't necessarily the case that Sam and I are the 2 people in the world who would be most qualified to undertake such a discussion, but we did our best, and it was a pretty high-level conversation. I mean, for me, it was approximately the level I think that would characterize a pretty decent PhD dissertation defense, and that's fairly high-level intellectual conversation. And
it is
the
stop
audience
the vote,
was just with us the entire time, and so that's cool, man. It could easily be that our relatively primitive initial mass communication.
They're having a civil discussion about like whether Trump should like glass the Middle East.
Technologies like television.
Which, by the way, to be clear, what is his name? Sam? What the fuck? Why am I just forgetting his name?
That's cool, man. Pretty decent PhD.
The other rationals. Sam Harris literally said that the Middle East should be nuked.
Mass communication.
He sincerely said that was a good idea.
Technology.
Like this is the fucking level of the intellectual dark web. These fucking psychos.
Like television made us look a lot stupider, even to ourselves.
It's just a
than we
thought
actually
experiment,
were, because
man.
everything had to be compressed to a very short period of time. Everything had to be scripted, so it couldn't be spontaneous discussion. You couldn't assume that your audience
Did I ever read the Sam Harris email exchange with Chomsky? I didn't.
Anything, because maybe it was the first time they watched the show.
Okay, so you guys voted the 3 chimpanzees would beat a lion. I'm glad that a majority of you take the correct opinion.
Remembered anything because you didn't know, like if it was a series, whether they had participated in the entire series. You had to aim at the lowest common denominator, and you couldn't assume much of an attention span. But it turns
Jordan
out
Peterson literally has like an undergrad level of philosophy.
have an incredible attention.
There's something interesting that you have to learn when you get into academia that I think you realize pretty quickly, is that there are a lot of people in like very, very high positions in academia, like tenured professors, that are just really fucking stupid. Just really fucking
span. Like I was just
and that's like how academia
watching
functions.
Breaking Bad, and I don't know how many hours Breaking Bad
Like
is.
impressively
It's like,
moronic.
6 seasons must be 60 hours, I think, something like that. And it's a continuous 60-hour movie, and that's a long
Well, that's
movie.
the thing. But he studied clinical philosophy. Peterson is an awful. I couldn't imagine how awful Peterson would be as a clinical, as a clinical psychologist. Like I couldn't imagine. That would be. I mean, literally, he said that he was not addicted to benzos. That was his like defense, because he is not allowed to be seen as like a weak human being, which is not to say that clinical psychologists can't get addicted to things. They're human beings, but that he treated as like it's not an addiction. I wasn't addicted. I'm not weak, mentally speaking. Like that's not the idea that a clinical psychologist is at that level of like, I don't even know if it's personal denial or whether he had to like not appear
really
mentally weak for his like young incel fans or something.
And there's all sorts of other shows that are perhaps of equal complexity. And man, people have no problem with them at all, right? They just eat them up. So it turns out that
it's on my
turns out
mind
maybe
that's
we're not so
addicted.
stupid.
Yeah.
And so that'd be nice if we weren't so stupid. And I'm kind of tired of everyone assuming that we are, just like I'm tired of everyone assuming that we're some sort of cancer on the planet. I don't like that attitude about human beings. I think there's something deeply, deeply wrong about it. This is something.
Jordan Peterson comes out with a very brave position against eco-fascism.
Something that's just kind of an interesting historical tidbit. Back in the late 1800s, there was a biologist named Thomas Huxley, and he was the famous novelist Aldous Huxley's, I think, great-grandfather, perhaps grandfather, and a very intelligent man, and a very gifted family. And Huxley was a great defender of Darwin, by the way, too. And he was commissioned by the English government to do a study of oceanic resources. This was back in the 1890s. And because the English at that point were concerned to some degree that, maybe it would be possible that we would overfish and cause trouble because of that. And Huxley did an exhaustive study, and he concluded that there's so much ocean and there's so much resource in the ocean that there wasn't a possibility that human beings with their rather puny technologies could ever do anything but put a small dent in the absolute overwhelming plenitude of the
He's just rambling. I mean, this is just the right version of if someone gave me like a fucking, just like told me to speak for 2 hours in front of an audience.
Water that covers more than half the planet.
It's just like, I don't know, I'm gonna fucking talk about nothing.
So that's only 130 years ago, thereabouts. That's not that long. You know, that's two relatively old.
It's not honestly interesting enough to like do a takedown of. He's just talking about whatever dumb shit he was reading in a.
It's not that long, and you know, put them back to back, sort of. And so that's yesterday.
Isn't it crazy, the technology?
In some sense, and it really wasn't at all until the 1960s that we had some sense that we had developed technologically to the point where.
I don't know. Maybe this is like a wrong read, but I don't view Peterson as a particular like. I mean, Peterson is representative of a threat, but he himself is not the threat. It actually sort of goes back to the point Ash Sarkar made about like how liberals view systemic racism. Where it's like the way that we solve systemic racism is by removing an individual, or systemic anti-Semitism, which is removing an individual, which is Corbyn. And that's like, well, then the system, like systemic is just equivalent to big. It's just a lot of racism. And I think that like there are some like libs and like left-leaning libs that view Peterson in almost a similar way. Which is also to say that like Peterson is actually racist, of course, and Corbyn isn't anti-Semitic. But the analogy I think still holds insofar as like, you know, Peterson as an individual is not that big of a threat, and removing him wouldn't like.
Some of what we could do mechanically.
It was sort of not worth the time.
Might start to have planetary repercussions. Say with, you know, we saw that with air.
He's in the Shapiro Content House. They should, honestly, the IDW should make like a hype house. You know, intellectual dark web hype house. Estragal, thank you for the gift sub.
In cities.
Do you think we're gonna watch more of this Andrew stuff? I don't know. I think it's like, I'm worried about DMCA stuff and like, you know, Adam having to watch out for TOS stuff because Adam Curtis will show
and the denuding of the countryside and then perhaps the overfishing in relationship to.
Yeah, the fact he's relevant this long is interesting because it is sort of just nonsense. Like at some level, it's just self-help stuff. I mean, it is just self-help. You know, I don't. But people like self-help stuff. It makes them feel better.
After World War
II. It's the same reason people like New Age stuff. And if you look at his like lectures, his understanding of the world with like the weird like the snake eating the other snake, and he's like, if you look at old Mayan prescriptions on stone, and also look at Roman ones, and other early anthropological societies, you can see this very similar design, which proves that chaos and order are inherent to human civilization. You know, it's this really weird, like just like pseudo anthropological analysis.
But nobody had any sense, really, until 1960 that, well, maybe we had to take care of things a little bit better than we were. Because
yeah, it's the DNA helix. It's like embodied in our. It's just absurd. So it is sort of like New Age stuff in that sense.
There was more of us. We were starting to become a force that was, to some degree, a match for nature. You know, and bloody well, thank God for that, you know, because nature was more than a match for us for a very long period of time, right? Our species has come up through epochs, eons of absolute brutal privation and difficulty and starvation and freezing temperatures and burning in the desert sun and lack.
Is this it? Is this the design? Is that a tit? I don't want to show that. There's a tit. There's some titties on this photo. But yeah, you can click that link from Anvilize in chat. It's bizarre. I mean, this sort of looks like a drawing Lacan would make. To be fair, but you know,
lack of water and lack of hygienic facilities and like just hand to mouth suffering, and you know, we've managed to organize ourselves to the point where that's still the lot of a substantial number of people on the planet.
Which is very funny because like the amount of suffering that like modern civilization is contingent upon is beyond human comprehension. Even like simply like the excess sort of like traffic for like traveling in during like Thanksgiving, especially now, leads to an amount of suffering that is like difficult to
decreasing
comprehend.
very rapidly. You know, the UN
And that uptick exists even just with the uptick of plane use
now projects that by
in relation to carbon emissions and the amount of like non-human
the
animals that
year
it kills.
2030, abject poverty, which is defined as living on
It's just we don't think about it.
less than $1.90 a day in today's U.S. money, will be eradicated. There won't be anybody in the world that poor. And the cynics say, well, that's a pretty damn low
Oh, those cynics. Those cynics that say you can't live on 60 cents a day.
barrier, let's say. But if you double it,
This totally goes back to what we were talking about before in relation to how like one of the things that Marx writes about in relation to the concept of subsistence, and the war between the working class and the bourgeoisie in terms of like what subsistence is. And the bourgeois get some sort of the workers get some sort of compensation based on like a brief periodic amounts of power they get through maybe like a strike, or there's a lack of workers, so the workers that exist are able to like gain some more power, gain some more influence or leverage, and then the workers attempt to define that increase in living standards as what subsistence is. And then the bourgeois say like, oh well, no, actually what subsistence is less than that. Having a fridge in your home is actually not subsistence. Being able to pay your phone bill doesn't actually include subsistence. Being able to like, live above the poverty line isn't, there's this discussion in relation to this, and what we can see with, and this is the same with like the World Bank number and the IMF, their understanding of what like global poverty is. I saw an interesting, and by interesting I mean hilarious, graph about the map of people in extreme poverty versus not in extreme poverty, and how like extreme poverty has gone away. And the credit of this has been liberalism, which is I think very ironic. Actually, I really want to find this. Does anyone remember? It's a lib posted this, and it was about how like the all these fucking tankies or whatever, well, whatever, highest threat they saw to liberalism, would claim that liberalism is bad, but look at this graph of like relative extreme poverty, compared to not. But I think it shows a good example of how like,
you also
well, let's look at like an actual decent living. What ought to be considered a subsistence? This is the one. Yeah. This is of course ironic because it's like, well, one of the things I say is like, and I've said this before, like, why don't these people just agree with fucking Dangus? Don't Dangus say the reason why China is good now is because of their poverty relief programs? Isn't that like what fucking if you look at what the fuck is his name? If you look at Parenti's reason for why the Soviet Union was good, is because of poverty reduction. I would also probably argue that those projects are more efficient at reducing poverty. If that's your metric, why aren't you just a fucking Dangist? What's the difference between the liberals and the Dangists in this context? I guess the main difference is that like liberalism is probably less efficient at reducing poverty. But I'm very cynical about that type of understanding of the world. That's as a social, as a communist, you want to change the mode of production. But what is extreme poverty? And then let's look at the actual, if you want to have like a humanist account, some semblance of a humanist account of what subsistence really is and what living above the poverty line means. Let's look at that graph, and let's look at the relative increase of people in the last fucking century. Like the relative, or let's look at the relative and the total increase of people in the last century who live under that in the world. Because especially, relative, I think it might be slightly going down, but total, it's skyrocketing. The total amount of people that are living below any all of the people who are defining poverty as and the poverty line as being relatively low have never lived at that level, and would never wish their on their like worst enemies in like worst enemy in this sense being like, you know, a rival publication or something, would never wish them to live at that level. But yeah, if you look at the total level of like a meaningful subsistence, it's skyrocketing in terms of the population of who are living like that. Which again relates to that fundamental discussion
See, that's
of what subsistence is and how much the worker does deserve.
very rapidly, and if you triple it, you see that's decreasing very rapidly, and you got to draw the bloody line somewhere, you know. And abject poverty is abject poverty, and the fact that it's decreased by 50% in the
I'll
last
be on QA
12
in a
years,
bit,
from
in a few
2000 to
hours.
the year 2000.
If you want to see that, because I'm technically streaming more. Wait, I can't see. Anonymous. Am I spelling that wrong? How am I this bad at spelling? Go watch. I'll be streaming on their thing at 6 p.m. I'll be joined by Jake.
Decreased the absolute level of abject poverty in the world by 50%. Right? It was the fastest economic. It was the most spectacular economic miracle in the history of the human.
All cops are bad cops.
Big Bower Boss.
Do you
Thank you for the
listen
3
to the
months.
Antifada podcast?
Sometimes. I don't listen to that many podcasts that much. DoorDash settles lawsuit for $2.5 million over deceptive tipping practices. Oh yeah, because they literally said like when you were tipping someone, they would say like, "Do you support Prop 22? It'll help the DoorDash workers," which it doesn't, of course. And you know they won. This doesn't matter. They won. Is China imperialist? Objectively speaking, yes. Read the chapter on primitive accumulation and capital. It doesn't matter. They won. You know, 2.5 million is nothing compared to the victory they got in California. Look at the primitive accumulation chapter on capital, and then look at poverty relief programs. Oh, are they pocketing tips? Wait, what? That's even worse. Does it not say anything? Today's settlement, GC consumers and deprived workers of monies. Oh, wow. That's even worse than I thought. How does that relate to Prop 20? Oh, that's how they paid for Prop 22. Jesus. They were just pocketing tips?
Kind.
Primitive accumulation isn't imperialism? Explain imperialism then. Or it's colonialism. The process of primitive accumulation is what happens during colonialism.
You know, you hardly ever hear about it. Hardly anyone knows about it. It's like,
yes,
it's a bloody
that's
miracle. There's more middle.
It is the same thing that's going on. So if you have it's the same process. So if you have a actual like consistent analysis of politics,
now,
you won't look at primitive accumulation in the Chinese countryside and think that it's a different material process than elsewhere.
Than non-middle class people. And there are way more obese.
Which is to say that China is a capitalist nation state and they're pursuing their material interests by expanding the market and expanding market relationships and integrating the I guess billions, is it billions? It's probably billions of subsistence farmers in the Chinese countryside into the global market relationship
people
and the global division of labor.
Then there are starving.
Forcing them to sell their labor to capitalism.
And so
capitalist system.
That's something to celebrate, you know? I mean, it's
they're
a funny thing to celebrate,
but
it's quite the thing to celebrate. And the fastest growing economies in the world are in sub-Saharan Africa.
And again, if you say that that's good, if you say that that is unequivocally good, you're actually taking you're making the Marxist mistake that, or the earlier Marxist mistake that Marx corrects himself on when he said that colonialism was a progressive force, because for most of Marx's life he viewed it as a progressive force, because he viewed it as relating to the sort of turning areas that weren't exposed to European industrial style capitalism, taking the indigenous populations and turning them into the same sort of pool of semi-skilled working class labor that would eventually overthrow capitalism. Marx later sees that there are other ways to get to socialism than industrial style capitalism, that this process is actually, you know, quite a violent one that isn't inherently good.
And
not
we're growing at
necessarily
5 to 7% a year. So it looks like the economic miracle that's, you know, that took place in India and in China, most of Southeast Asia, is really starting to kick in Africa. And it seems, at least in part, it's because of the collapse of the Soviet Union back in the 1989, and the lack of overt pressure to have African countries pursue the most pathological.
Well, I mean, the orthodox view of primitive accumulation, I guess, is that it's over. But I don't. Oh, Trash Future, thank you for the raid. Thank you for the 127 viewers. I hope you had a good stream. Everyone follow the Trash Future podcast and follow them on Twitch. The contemporary reading of primitive accumulation is that it's ongoing. And I don't see why you wouldn't extend that analysis to places in which, you know, the commons are closing and you're forcing subsistence farmers into the global capitalist division of labor. Yeah, we're watching a fucking Jordan Peterson video.
Possible economic doctrines that anybody
Which,
could ever.
you know, we can stop watching this. This is just boring. It's not even like interesting to riff on.
They just stopped doing that. Has
It's just
freed
boring.
people up to start to become, well, if not rich, at least richer, and at least with the possibility of a continual rise upward. You know, the child mortality rate in Africa now is the same as it was in Europe in 1952. I mean, that's really something, you know, and
which is also the thing about. Did you guys read that article? Did I show that article about that lib psycho? That was like why child labor in Africa is actually endearing and creates strong work ethic for the Africans.
Longevity rates of
it was some like, was it for the IMF?
Increased tremendously in Africa, and you know, we're kicking the slats out of some major diseases. Polio is pretty much gone. It looks like we're putting a pretty good dent in malaria. That'll do great things for Africa. I think there's a real possibility with some concerted effort that we could get rid of tuberculosis in the next 15 years or so if we made that a target. That would be something. You know, that's an ancient scourge of mankind. We could certainly do without that. So there and there are intelligent people who are.
Let's watch this. Oh no, do you want to watch Gorilla versus Leopard Animal Face Off? I'm worried about TOS music, or DMCA-able music, honestly. I'm not gonna watch it, I'm sorry. Let's watch this video by Plastic Pills on JP.
Dear denizens of YouTube, this is Plastic Pills with an important public service announcement. I am here on the internet because I have an important message for you. We are asking
it's not real animals fighting, it's an animation of animals.
And SJWs to please turn off autoplay and stay on high alert in comment sections. Right now, all we know is that there are packs of gormless young males calling themselves the Lobster Sons, rampaging around comment sections, subreddits, and various feeds. Armed with facts and very edgy memes, they are tearing down our sacred safe spaces and posing a risk.
All of our feels are turning into reels.
We are being told right now that they can be identified by wanton disregard for political correctness and by their overwhelming powers of facts and logic. The origins of these powers are currently unknown. But for the time being, please avoid private browsing windows. And for everyone's safety, do not engage. I repeat, do not engage a lobster son in an argument. We will update you as soon as we know anything further. Okay, I can't.
That's done? Yeah, that's on. That's your best intro yet, man.
I don't know if that's DMCA-able, which is awesome. Again, great streaming platform. Great streaming platform. I use this royalty-free
Gordon
song.
B.
Okay,
Peterson,
it's fine.
the
then.
Jungian hero type
trust you.
famous for his epic battles with the sinister strawmen, including
Dr. Archaeology.
That's
He does
Mike
look like a
Michel
villain.
Foucault in the middle, and a more reprehensible individual you could hardly ever discover or even dream up, no matter how twisted your imagination.
Doesn't Jordan Peterson like Nietzsche? What fucking Nietzsche books has he been reading? What is Jordan? I want to know what Jordan Peterson thinks Nietzsche is saying.
One of the main players in this entire drama is a French philosopher named Jacques Derrida, who I think
Daredevil.
most trenchantly formulated the anti-Western philosophy that is being pursued so assiduously by the radical left.
and of course his great arch enemy,
Preferred pronouns.
What I said at the beginning was that I was not
The
going to
pronoun
cede
stats
linguistic territory to radical leftists, regardless of whether or not it was put in law.
Go get him, lobster daddy! But while Jordan Peterson was battling Daredevil, obliterating hysterical SJWs with facts and logic, and offering Western culture defending fashion options to his lobster sons, damn, Jordan, I actually like this. Yeah, look,
that's actually a nice.
This is not bad.
44 Canadian
A
dollars.
shadowy threat yet loomed, growing in the chaosmos.
Mortals, behold the coming of the lobster god.
Well, that's the thing. If the complaint that fucking Peterson has with Foucault is that morality is subjective, I don't know what part of Nietzsche he's reading. Yeah, I'm assuming
There was
Peterson
God, and
didn't get to
God
Deleuze.
is a lobster.
Here we go. It's The Guardian. Global development is supported by Bill and Melinda Gates. Child labor doesn't have to be exploitation. It can give me life skills. The same process, just, happening
So
elsewhere.
many, including myself, have made a joke about Peterson and his relatively flippant remarks about lobsters, such that he sells pillows with lobsters on them. Don't mind if I do. And don't get me wrong, it's not a great analogy, and Peterson has long been on the skids because his boomer logic sucks. But
He's back,
also
baby.
somewhat analogous to what counts for intellectual debate on the internet these days, so let's read up on his 12 Rules for Life, Lobster Son self-help book. I'm actually going to present a rather charitable interpretation of lobster logic. His point is this. Lobsters are territorial and exert their position in a hierarchy using a couple processes for, quote, dispute resolution, unquote. Peterson's advice, observing the Hubble lobster, is to stand up straight and confidently if you want others
Did they
to
change the
respect
title?
you. He rightly
Oh, that's fucking... Child labor is exploitation, but the household work I did as a child gave me life skills. Getting children to go to factories to instead of having the time to go to school, they have to go to factories because the income based on the wage of the parents isn't enough to even make the borderline smallest amount of possible subsistence you could imagine. It's the same as like me having to wash me having to clean the kitchen when I was a child. Walk with her mother every day to fetch water on her. Just is supported by. It doesn't say who they're supported by. Works for a pro-tobacco think tank. Of course they do.
Remember when
That's always
He
what
points
all these psychos are getting paid to write that type of shit. I don't know who reads that. Is the old title still in the URL? Oh, it has to be. They can't change
that
the URL.
how others treat you is largely a result of how you act around them. Here's how a lobster interaction works. They show their claws and shoot spray at each other, which tells the other lobster about its size, sex, health, and mood. This tells the cuck lobster to retreat. 2, they beef. 3, they combat and try to flip each other onto their back.
Isn't cancel culture just doing what lobsters do?
And then 4, they try to kill each other. One wins, one loses, and the one that loses has its brain transformed into a loser. And quote, anyone
That's what happens when you get successfully
who
canceled.
has experienced a painful transformation after serious defeat in romance or a career, unquote, may feel the same. So now we have a cucked lobster. And cucked lobster brains have, quote, helped us understand the structure and function of the brain and behavior of more complex animals, including human beings. Lobsters have more in common with you than you might think, particularly when you are feeling crabby, haha, unquote. Yo, what the hell?
Jesus.
Boomers. Part of the point in this is that
I don't like, I have to think that most Peterson supporters just listen to his lectures.
there are many
Like, none of them read this
signals
shit,
that
right?
go into
None of them read the shit and are like, haha,
a
yes,
social interaction before an actual
I
fight.
agree, King.
Come at me, bro.
Part of a male's successful navigation of a, quote, dominance hierarchy is about signals, such as standing up straight.
Come at me, bro. Come at me, bro. Come at me. I'm right here.
Basically, it explains why
Classic.
some guys get laid and others don't. An alpha lobster parading dominance around his territory, rousing subordinate lobsters from their shelters at night, just to remind them who's their daddy. Who is their daddy? Oh, Jordan.
Peterson.
All this is brought back to humans in that there's a part of our brain that keeps track of our
Does
position
Peterson think that he's, I guess he must think that he's
in
like
the
a father
dominance
figure.
hierarchy.
Oh! Yeah, it's the same. Wow, Peterson's right.
And that under such conditions, we can't easily put up the
Was
kind
that
of
Jersey
fight
Shore?
that life demands. Look for your inspiration to the
Because wasn't Hitchens, he used to be like a Trotskyist, right? Or he said he was a Trotskyist throughout his whole life?
victorious lobster with its 35 million years of practical wisdom. Stand up straight with your shoulders back. Thanks, Dad. Now, you may have witnessed Peterson's analogy of society in actual practice. Here. It's drunk and sexually frustrated dude bros yelling at each other outside of a club after the bouncers have told them to go the f home. Inspiring. But what if none of us showed up at this nightclub society in the first place? What if we, including females, which in Peterson's myth are consigned to
The trot neocon pipeline is so like thorough that literally like permanent revolution in early neoconservatives was like an important element of their
chasing
theoretical
pheromones
basis.
and big claws? What if we decided to communally gather and do things that humans do, like discuss how to improve the world in which we immediately live?
Oh, the
I'll
trot
give you a better
neocon
option.
connection is so.
Why be a lobster son when you could be a lobster god? Hold me back, bro. Hold me back. Here's a second lobster for your consideration.
God reached its height of intensity in 10,000 BC, a primitive stage in the geology of morals.
The geology.
Before states, civilization.
Wait, is this quoting Peterson? Did he like forgot that it was genealogy? What is it? Just get that word wrong?
God reached
this
its
is
height
okay.
of
This is Deleuze.
intensity
Okay.
in 10,000 BC, a primitive stage in the geology of morals.
Okay.
Before states, civilization.
No, Deleuze is smart and based, and so
and
it's
war
clearly
machines
that's clearly something.
territorialized the skin of the earth. There was the
Yeah,
dog,
that makes sense. Deleuze,
and
okay.
God is a lobster.
I thought for a second that Peterson forgot that in Nietzsche it's genealogy of morals, and he just mixed the words up.
In the hands of state-sponsored sophists, this deity has been cheapened, encased in touchscreens, and will be refossilized in these e-commerce shopping carts.
I
There,
understand
the
in
lobster
Deleuze it's
waits,
Yeah, it's an illusion.
To be rediscovered by future
No,
people.
if it's done by the dude that's smart, it's clearly an illusion. But if it was Peterson, it wouldn't have been. It would have been just him being dumb.
The remnants
That's how that works.
and artifacts of our civilization, the people that are to come, the Übermenschen. Add to cart, add to cart, add to cart.
The strata of the lobster are variable, serving as the initiation for new lines of flight, or rather, ancient lines of flight made new. I am articulating a variety of themes from Deleuze and Guattari's A Thousand Plateaus.
Is it
Honestly, it's
Guattari?
quite surprising that Gilles Deleuze and his
Guattari.
sidekick Guattari have not been yet included in the sinister strawman.
No, he's too obscure.
Deleuze and Guattari are figures of everything that Jordan Peterson opposes. But
Oh,
he has
Deleuze was like a walking encyclopedia of philosophy. Like, you need to understand the canon well enough to like literally reinvent how to do
spent his
philosophy.
time not reading Marx, Derrida, and Foucault when he could have spent it not reading this book, the philosophical equivalent of an acid trip, or a manifesto for creativity and dynamic thought. This is not a book of facts and logic. It's a book of promiscuous
Feels.
theology, a bricolage of concepts, one of which is the lobster god. God is a lobster, or a double pincher, a double bind. Each stratum exhibits phenomena constitutive of double articulation. So here is the ancient God. The double articulation occurs here and here. And each articulation concerns a relationship between substance and form, the first of imposition and the second of actualization. Then back again. Substances are nothing other than formed matters. Forms imply a code, modes of coding and decoding. Now, all of this might sound like gibberish, but if you start to understand the central concept of this book, deterritorialization and reterritorialization, then the creativity Deleuze refers to elliptically embodies both of these concepts and both at once. This is really, at bottom, a book about creativity. Imagine if Einstein had accepted the rule that F equals ma. Imagine if artists never sought to change the rules. What if gender roles were forever immutable? Imagine if no one could change rules because they were written in a constitution. For Deleuze and Guattari, knowledge, all knowledge, should strive to be
Does it not let you
creative.
say bimbos?
Even science, in this sense, can be closer to art than, submitting a tax return. The purpose of thought is to be inventive, create new concepts, new analogies, and new methods of understanding what is. That means not simply reciting some repetitive version of substances, but being creative, as God is, generating new forms of thought, set off into new directions. And the deified lobster is an analogy of this. Each side of it renews and redeploys the meaning of settled ideas so that we can think in new ways. So first definition, territorializing, or territories. Territorializing occurs over the landscape of thought, of concepts. We can imagine the land of substances and forms as one imagines a map. Maps, of course, change over time. Territories shift,
I think
are traded.
Matt Christmas talks about deterritorializing and reterritorializing.
And this represents what is possible to think at any given time. Territorializing for Deleuze and Guattari is about making things fixed, about defining boundaries and borders,
Map
and restricting
territory knowledge,
identities
yeah,
and
that's
thought
pretty much-
within them. For example, I am a lobster son. The defining boundaries of lobster sons are that they create social strata, that their dominions are based on size, strength, and the desire to reproduce. If that is the territory, the boundaries in which you situate
Right.
yourself, then you have a specific code to
And
follow that will
this also literally tracks with the existence of territories and like the state formation.
define your success within those boundaries.
Oh, that's where it comes out
Stand
at
up
more than
straight,
anything else.
clean your room. Be a man. A form of territory.
There's a dichotomy between like nomadological and like sort of anti-state philosophy, and then state philosophy.
Territorialization also happens, according to Deleuze and Guattari, in Freudian psychoanalysis, by which desire is restrained by the law of the father. The Oedipus complex, according to which your desire for completion by your mother cannot be achieved because you fear your father's repercussions. So you then reform your desire onto other things in the world. Both this animal lobster social stratum and the stratum of desire, which I covered in a previous video, prescribe from the outset why you are the way you are.
Window. I mean, you could imagine that that's a part of territories.
Why you do what you do and what you should do next. You could extend the concept of territorializing to people who identify themselves with a particular politics. I am a progressive Democrat. I am a Marxist. I am a conservative.
That's why it's praxis for me to say that I'm apolitical.
Each of these self-identifications, you're given a speech code to follow that will get you into a group so that you can.
What is the funniest answer to someone asking me what my politics are? Because it happens every stream.
On Reddit and consume the same memes. Now,
like every stream, there is at least one. I'm a Carlist.
Situating yourself in.
Which is, I want, being a Carlist is just wanting a king whose name is Carl.
Inside a territory is not necessarily bad or wrong, but if you remain there, you are not activating your creative potential. Deleuze and Guattari want us to be nomads, crossing and recrossing boundaries. Like the lobster's double articulation,
I'm a progressive Democrat.
Territorializing and re-territorializing ourselves to get out of stale categories, to activate the potential of creative thinking and so on. Sometimes this is dangerous and leads to conflict, but on the whole, it leads to.
I'm a Catalonian separatist. Oh, I learned about recently. There's a subset within like. And they would be very insulted that I would assert that they are this, but Catalonian separatists who don't want independence for Catalonia, they want it for Murcia.
What is a less boring and less striated world. Now, for his part, Peterson's message is the opposite. It's like he's fundamentally conservative.
Where is it?
A boomer dad handing out books of rules for people to follow, rather than questioning the validity of these.
A Yugoslav unionist.
Sedimented rules in the first place. He wants things to stay territorialized.
Valencia, not Murcia. Sorry, Valencian separatists.
Deterritorialization is how you think beyond the extant conditions that you always already find yourselves in.
They don't like Catalonia, and if you tell a Murcian, wait, did I just forget? What is it again? If you tell a Valencian separatist that they're speaking Catalan, they'll like fucking.
For example, perhaps there are other forms of man or manliness that we've actually never considered before. The unction here is to treat yourself and your thought like an artistic process rather than reducing yourself to a list of identifying substances like gender, class, race, political position, or a psychoanalytic diagnosis, or any other identifying category. The goal is always to be interrogating forms, to fire off your thought in a new direction and just to see where it lands, not simply inserting yourself into, pre-existing forms. This is partially why feminists such as Rosie Braidotti, for example, pick up Deleuze and Guattari's call for the creation and re-territorialization of concepts. For her, the concept of woman, even more so than that of man, has been historically restricted to particular conceptual forms. Following the lobster god in this context offers a model for the fundamental reconsideration of what substances, including women, should be or could be. Now, this does not mean that anything goes. This does not mean that anything can be anything. Deterritorializing concepts is also not necessarily more moral in every case. There's always a double articulation. For each novel act, what Deleuze calls a line of flight, there's also a counteract, a process that is always cutting off the lines of flight from productive divergence, and in some cases that can also be a goal, as there are some expressive potentials that
I don't want to endure, and perhaps you don't want to either. But like the lobsters competing for territory, the dynamism that Deleuze and Guattari seek, and that which makes conservative boomer dads anxious, are ultimately to be a process of conceptual renegotiation.
Isn't this just dialectics? No. Deleuze's position is very anti-dialectical. And also plays out far more in space than it does in time, I guess you could say. And the deterritorializing and reterritorializing is if there is, I guess, more as if there are theses and antitheses than anything about syntheses, in a certain sense, I guess. That's still one of the points in Deleuze and how social systems work is that, like, they have this, they work by breaking down for the most part, but that they can continue this process indefinitely.
The goal of real thinking in any age is to rethink what's
How can you be a Deleuzean dialectician? You can't. You literally can't. That's impossible.
possible. And your lobster god
You're misunderstanding Deleuze or dialectics.
wants you to get around to doing that much more often.
There would be no way of making a
If
structure
you're doing
that
that,
could possibly
which I don't think Matt's doing that.
function.
I think if you're not a Deleuzean if you just like use the word de and reterritorializing. That's cool. What else do we want to watch? Oh, let's watch This Is Funny. This is funny. This is unrelated, but it's very funny. Geocentrists tricked a bunch of physicists.
When I first learned about the principle. Can you just introduce yourself real quick? My name is Dan Olson. I am the writer and director of In Search of a Flat Earth. I first became aware of the principle when I was working on a documentary about flat Earth philosophy. There was this particular flat Earth channel on YouTube, and I was going through all the most watched videos on the channel, taking notes, and one of them, this 2-hour video, had just these long clips from some other documentary about Copernicus and Kepler and Brahe, and it was actually kind of decent quality animation, and Kate Mulgrew was narrating, and it said on screen explicitly, used with permission, such and such films. And I thought, you know, that's odd.
The greatest astronomer of the time, Tycho Brahe, developed a new geocentric model. The Earth occupies the center, the planets orbit the sun, and the sun orbits the Earth.
You know, YouTube culture being what it is, it's already unusual for anyone to actually ask permission.
Wouldn't they just crash into the fucking planets?
Let alone
wouldn't that happen?
On Flat Earth YouTube. So right away, that told me that something was up. Clearly, the people who made this first video, which was just an anti-science screed on a channel full of flat Earth, anti-vax, ancient alien stuff.
It's an extremely complex orbit. I fucking hope it is, for our sake.
And that's weird. There's not usually a lot of crossover between random YouTube cranks and the kind of people who are able to get in touch with Kate Mulgrew's agent. So I prod a bit, and it turns out there's a whole buck wild story behind that. It had actually made a small splash when the film first came out in, I think it was 2014. You know, this documentary about how Earth is the center of the universe and the sun orbits the Earth, and they tricked a bunch of astrophysicists into being in it, and Kate Mulgrew was narrating, and there's this whole story behind that. And I just knew that it was something that I might want to talk about. But then, as I was digging a bit deeper, I realized that the executive producer, Robert Sanjay.
Well, also, folks, I haven't done this at all this stream. If you have a Twitch Prime and you haven't used it, make sure to use it on me. We have 27 TON emotes. They're all very cool. Like the one about you can call people a lib. There's Max Stirner doing the PogChamp face. Lots of cool stuff.
A man with a doctorate degree from a fake university effectively interviewed himself in his own movie in order to make himself look like an expert. And it was just like, that's it. I have to talk about this now.
Subscribe to me. I can link this too. Because Falling Ideas is a great channel.
Okay, first things first. The Earth is not the center of the universe. I'm putting this at the front because I don't want to have to debunk every random ass claim the filmmakers toss out as they come up. The folks who made this film are going to make a number of claims that are just wrong. We
Rev
have,
Jr.,
in
thank you for
fact,
your
demonstrated
bucks.
that the Earth orbits the Sun. Stellar
Yeah.
parallax was first measured in the 1830s and has only gotten more precise since, and Lagrange point satellites behave the way that they do because we accurately...
Maybe I'm just a globe cuck, you know? Maybe. CBT, great. Thank you for the 4 months. You know, I haven't rationally, personally observed the Earth revolving around the sun. Maybe
understand
I'm just a
how
cuck.
gravity
I don't know.
behaves on celestial objects. An
Loving the
understanding
lobster shit.
that has enabled us to, for example, detect black holes, as in this 23-year time lapse of S2 orbiting the black hole Sagittarius A. The central claim of the film is that the cosmic microwave background radiation indicates that the Earth is the center of a universal axis, which is just not actually.
Yeah, if you're outside of Canada and you give me money, you're reducing the trade deficit.
True. They massage the data.
I don't know if that's real, but I would like to pretend that it is.
To make it look more significant than it really is, giving the misleading impression that it's a very precise axis that passes right through the Earth. But in reality, it's a lot more vague than that. Bottom line, geocentrism as a model of the cosmos requires a universe where a series of incredibly consistent physical principles apply to everything else we can see except us. Now, that's exactly what they're trying to imply, but as with Flat Earth, this creates a cascade effect where successively more and more functional, predictive science needs to be discarded in order to make the claim.
Oh yeah, anti-mask stuff is coming to Canada, which is not a surprise at all whatsoever, because, and it's like, you know, fucking, this is a great, you know, porque no los dos, you know, which is, I'm butchering the Spanish language. But people are like, oh, well, what, I can't believe that, I can't believe that all of this is coming to Canada. We were so much better than America because we didn't elect Trump because of all of how bad Canada is. Also, all of the systemic problems that led to that are totally not just also the case in our like, you know, capitalist settler state. There's totally no connection whatsoever. The entire world quarantine camps for a virus with a 99 point, which again, not like more than 1% of people who get this virus die. I tested positive for critical thinking. Of course, that's, you know, this is Canada's future. This is Canada's future, by the way. Literally fucking, he's cute. Look at that. What's the bunny? Oh, the rabbit hole, of course. Of course, the rabbit hole. They look so happy. This is the future, baby. I'm gonna. Oh, is this an American? Oh, they're showing clips. Okay, yeah. Yeah, that's like 1% with like a functioning medical system.
Work. You can't just redraw the orbits of the solar system. You need to claim that Earth is gravitationally exceptional. And if Earth is the fulcrum of the universe, then the stellar field needs to be moving at absurd speeds in order to orbit the Earth once every 24 hours, speeds that would be detectable and relativistic. And so you also need to discard relativity, and it all just causes a cascade. And again, that right there is exactly what they're claiming, that they found evidence that should cause us to toss out relativity and universal gravity and everything we've discovered based on those principles, because it disagrees with their model. And since
Who
that
peed on my
isn't
rug?
happening,
Thank you for your Jeff
they
Bezos
claim there's a
bucks.
conspiracy that's suppressing the evidence. And now, on with the show.
Which again, all these conspiracy theories just, they always start believing that it's the Jews that are doing it. Because with it, when it's a fully irrational belief system, that like thinks that there's this massive conspiracy to just like hide the truth, and there's no explanation of like why they would want to do that or what they had to gain. They're just being bad guys. Then anti-Semitism has such an easy time introducing itself.
In the spring of 2014, a small media storm kicked up around the trailer for an upcoming documentary.
Oh, and
written
especially because this requires that like general relativity is fake. In which case, you know, Einstein is Jewish.
Rick Delano, directed
You can see how they would very easily.
by Catherine Thomas and produced by Robert
I'm sure they're
Sungenis.
like all
the trailer,
things,
narrated
like-
by Star Trek Voyager's Kate Mulgrew and featuring a number of high-profile physicists, including Lawrence Krauss, Max Tegmark, and Michio Kaku, seems to be arguing against the heliocentric model of the solar system.
Holy shit.
Everything we think we know about our universe is wrong.
You can go on some websites of NASA and see that they've started to take down stuff that might hint to a geocentric universe. So they send out this satellite and they find out these temperature disturbances throughout the universe were all pointing to the Earth.
This caught the attention of a bunch of entertainment industry publications, which led to several of the participants issuing public denunciations of their role in the film. Lawrence Krauss wrote an article for Slate titled, "I have no idea how I ended up in that stupid geocentrism documentary. I have no recollection of being interviewed for such a film, and of course had I known of its premise, I would have refused. So either the producers used clips of me that were in the public domain, or they bought them from other production companies that I may have given some rights to distribute my interviews to, or they may have interviewed me under false pretenses, in which case I probably signed some release." Following Krauss's lead, Kate Mulgrew issued a short statement on Facebook. "I understand there has been some controversy about my participation in a documentary called The Principle. Let me assure everyone that I completely agree with the eminent physicist Lawrence Krauss, who was himself misrepresented in the film, and who has written a succinct rebuttal in Slate. I am not a geocentrist, nor am I in any way a proponent of geocentrism.
That's
More
hilarious.
importantly, I do not subscribe to anything Robert Sungenis
That
has written
is
regarding science
so
and history,
funny.
and had I known of his involvement, would most certainly have
How
avoided
did
this
they-
documentary. I was a voice for hire and a misinformed one at that. I apologize for any confusion that my voice on this trailer may have
Is
caused."
Trump live?
The
Trump is
producers
old
fired
news.
back against these by posting a YouTube
sorry.
video hosted by writer-producer Rick Delano titled "Thought Crime: The Conspiracy to Stop the Principle," which, you know, Jesus Christ. Thought crime, conspiracy, I think that alone gives you a pretty good snapshot of where these folks are at. In this video that implies they are the target of a conspiracy, they provide what they consider to be discrediting evidence against Krauss and Mulgrew, and explicitly state that it's not about geocentrism, it's about cosmology.
I checked the film thousands and thousands and thousands of times, and there's just nothing about the Jews in the film. It just isn't. It's a film about cosmology. It's a film about the Copernican principle.
This is a sentiment he has expressed repeatedly. In an interview with Colin Lesher at Popular Science, "The film is not about geocentrism," Delano told me flatly. "Rather, it's about the Copernican principle, Copernicus's idea that the Earth doesn't occupy a cosmically special place in the universe." Okay, first of all, those aren't mutually exclusive. Those are nested subjects. Second, is the movie geocentric? Sort of? Rick's wishy-washy, "It's not about geocentrism, it's about cosmology," is actually pretty accurate.
He said Geos, not Jews. Yeah,
Finished movie.
there's going to be a lot of flat Earth conspiracy people that think that
in
it's...
that the film shares that wishy-washy attitude. The film itself is
There's
a
a
lot more
connection there.
non-committal than the trailer implies, being mostly composed of implication and innuendo rather than offering any actual claims.
So what I take away from this is we simply always need to keep an open mind and listen to all viewpoints and let Mother Nature be the one who gets the final word.
There's always a revolution coming in science because science is necessarily provisional. It cannot make a final statement because it doesn't know everything. It cannot examine what's going on at the four corners of the universe.
As to how many angels dance on the head of a pin, I think it's still an open question.
You know, I can tell you what the future might be, but it could be something different.
Best city in Vancouver that isn't Vancouver, Montreal, or Toronto. Best city in Canada that isn't and is close to Toronto. Oh no, you're
not a lot to
referring
really
someone.
sum up about the documentary
I thought that was a
itself.
question
The
for
A
me.
plot is mostly interviews with a mix of scientists and crackpot religious zealots, while the B
Calgary's
plot
good.
is a
It's funny. Calgary is the only part in the last provincial election or the last national election. In Alberta, Calgary was like the only part of literally the whole province that didn't vote Conservative. There were like two parts of it that were NDP.
reasonably accurate animated summary of the development
Or
of
maybe
this
that might have been Edmonton actually.
solar model from prehistory to Albert Einstein.
I think it's both
just
of them.
with the
I think
occasional
both of them are NDP.
curiosity of how something is framed that tosses up the odd red flag here and there.
No, it
This
was
is the
Edmonton. You're
beginning
right.
of
You're right.
faith
Sorry.
And the beginning of science. In the beginning, they're both the same thing.
And that's kind of the crux of it. There's no screamingly absurd claims. This isn't Masaru Emoto claiming you can grant water healing properties by exposing it to positive thoughts.
だから文字を水に見せてみよう。そしたら水はそれすらもね、その振動すらも感じて。
Even when the film gets into theology, it does so in a really tepid, vague way, talking mostly about faith in the abstract.
Ever since the trial of Galileo, there has often been tension,
I'll be right back
if
in a
not
second.
outright conflict, between faith and science. Remarkably, the Copernican principle seems to be the ground upon which faith and science are again, at long last, approaching one another.
As a whole, the principle is an adept example of a classic form of bad faith debate, which is the school of just asking questions. It's a form of debate where you advance your ideological agenda entirely in the form of questions, in order to take the role of a non-committed bystander who doesn't believe anything and has no opinions, but has a lot of concerns. This approach becomes fairly obvious when you listen to the
Still
way
in
that
line to
Sanjanis and
vote.
Delano and Thomas
Liv
defend
Buggy,
the
thank you
film,
for the 3 months.
focusing
Folks, if you're still in line to vote for Joe Biden, stay in line.
mostly on a narrative that the principle is exploring possibilities, and the particular idea that the preemptive critics of the film were misled by the film's trailer.
Okay, so they did see the trailer, and I think all these conclusions are being made.
Yeah, that's true. They're basing it off the trailer.
But when you actually watch the film, people come back and go, that's not what was in the news.
Of course, that's all deliberate. The trailer is intentionally provocative. Like, I can't really think of a clearer example of bad faith whinging than this.
And the trailer, of course, is a trailer. It's designed to stir up controversy.
Well, of course it is. Sure
And,
it is. Sure
you
it
know,
is.
we just assumed that we'd get the same treatment as everybody else, which is a foolish assumption.
Rick, you made the trailer. It's your trailer for your movie. You don't get to complain that the trailer misled people when you're the person who made the trailer. But this does create a really entertaining contrast between the movie itself and all the paratextual things that the creators put out. So on one hand, the director, Catherine Thomas, claims that the movie is a really even-handed examination of some cutting-edge science, where everyone gets an equal say and it's left to the audience to draw their own conclusions.
And another thing about it was making sure that it was balanced, which of course, you know, the controversy came out saying that it wasn't, but it's truly, you know, I even said when I did this, I said, hey, listen, if we're going to make a film that's one-sided, I don't want to be involved. But if we're going to let everybody have a seat at the table and then let, you know, the audience figure out what they want to do, then I'm all in. And so that's
what you did so beautifully.
And on the other hand, you have the second trailer for the film.
Science has found evidence that Earth is the center of the universe.
All cops are bad cops.
6 months.
Science has found evidence that
Janet
God
Roberts,
exists.
thank you for the 6 months.
So why do they tell us we are insignificant?
This is
Not
such
to
a
mention,
cool
you know,
trailer.
Robert Sanjanis, the executive producer who has
You watched like the documentaries. It's like, look, I don't get why people are misrepresenting our position. I don't get it. Why is people making such a
continued to
big
be
deal?
heavily involved in the promotion of the film for years following its release, including writing numerous commentary articles for the official website, theprinciplemovie.com, wrote an entire book promoting geocentrism called Galileo was wrong, the church was right. Now, you might be wondering if maybe that's also just some provocative marketing.
That sounds like a fucking drill tweet, dude.
Maybe it's just a way to reel people in for a discussion of some interesting oddities in data derived from measurements of the cosmic microwave background radiation. Chapter 3. Evidence Earth is in the center of the universe. Okay, yeah, that's pretty unambiguous. And this is the root of it. Despite the superficially non-committal, just asking questions tone of the film, the intended takeaway is pretty obvious and is of course reinforced by the evidence of how the film has been rhetorically employed since its release, with the film mostly playing for Christian faith film audiences and the same new age spirituality crowd as other pseudoscience and lightly conspiratorial films like What the Bleep Do We Know and Zeitgeist. Before we go on, let's talk for a bit about the folks behind it all, because to really understand what the principle is saying, we need to understand the worldview that it comes from. So, two people we've already partly introduced, writer-producer Rick Delano and director-editor Catherine Thomas. They are the frontline filmmakers. Thomas, a music video producer and director turned documentarian, seems to have fallen in with Delano by happenstance, and while she claims she disagrees with Rick about a lot of stuff, the two of them have continued to work together since, and she vocally defends the film.
If you give an opinion where a geocentric opinion from one subject and they go, oh, no, you can't say that, you know? And if you go, oh, and like...
This is super funny though, right? Because they are claiming that they are being like oppressed for thinking that the Earth is the center of the universe, which is such a good example of like conservatives who think that they're being oppressed because people disagree with them. It's not that you can't say a thing that it is forbidden, it's that it's fucking stupid. And people are like, you're being fucking stupid.
Like the principle, you have multiverse, you have string theory, you have all of this. And I'm like, all of this is controversial. And actually, that's what kind of made me mad whenever I was seeing when people were attacking the principle, they were only attacking one thing, which was the geocentric stuff. And I was like, why? Because there's so many theories in here.
Delano is a Catholic fundamentalist and seemingly a true believer in geocentrism. For years prior to the production of The Principle, Rick maintained a personal blog titled Magisterial Fundies. From the October 2011 launch post of that blog, Magisterial Fundies, The Soft Opening, Rick states, "The Catholic Church has, by the sovereign decision of God Almighty, been granted a charism to teach the truth concerning faith and morals infallibly. I expect to examine precisely those anomalous, unusual cases where magisterial teaching has either been abandoned or qualified by subsequent lower-level teaching. Critical areas will include 1. The question of whether the Jews enjoy a separate covenant for salvation. I argue that this notion is damnable heresy.
Wait, sorry, I heard the Jews and I was not paying attention.
2. Whether the church has reversed her condemnation of Galileo. I argue she hasn't, and I further argue that the utterly astounding new observations from SDSS and WMAP suggest that this is an extraordinarily powerful instance where the protection of the church's
most fundamentalists are like probably anti-Semitic.
Teaching on geocentrism is being validated before our eyes by science itself 400 years after the fact. On top of this, Rick is absolutely conspiratorially minded, tossing out bizarre accusations and claims as though they're self-evident.
We had no chance with the principle against the forces that were arrayed against us. We were just, we were targeted for destruction and absolute, and we had the highest grossing single screen opening in America the weekend that we opened it. And they wouldn't even hold us over in the theater because we were the subject of a boycott by a political organization.
Executive producer Robert Singenis has a doctorate in religious studies from Calamus International University, with the hitch being that Calamus International University is a defunct, unaccredited distance learning outfit that was registered in the Republic of Vanuatu, but consisted entirely of a P.O. box and a secretary service in London. His doctoral work in religious studies was overseen mainly by two people, by a physicist, Robert Bennett, who is also the co-author of Singenis' book Galileo Was Wrong, and is in The Principle.
Amazing.
And Dr. Morris Berg. Now, Berg's an interesting guy. Dr. Berg
This man is like a human thumb.
has a Bachelor of Science in Psychology from the University of East London, and then
literally a thumb.
PhD and DCH degrees in hypnotherapy from, quote, overseas universities. He's also an accredited past life healer, registered metaphysician, and an energy EFT master practitioner certified by the Guild of Energists.
I want to be a registered metaphysician.
Okay, so let's just have a look at the modern energy chart. This is a pictorial representation of a pattern that exists at least, and I mean at least, in all social mammals.
The Guild of Energists,
Sorry, what's going on with -7 there?
are one of those kind of really predictable self-help systems that takes a couple reasonable ideas like
back to self-help shit every time.
Happiness is good, and maps it onto a truly bonkers series of metaphysics. And once you scratch the surface, you realize it's just The Secret or prosperity gospel or the power of positive thinking, including the same dangerous core belief that good people are.
My favorite thing about, like, well, one of the funny things about the phrase metaphysics is that it's only a phrase because of Aristotle, because they didn't know what to name, like, the book, which is essentially like lecture notes from Aristotle's like school. Then they didn't know what to name the one that was after the physics book, so they just called it metaphysics after the physics one.
Successful.
But these guys seem to think that there's like a connection between metaphysics and physics because of that.
Therefore, successful people are good. And of course, it gets a little bit culty when you get into the parts where the founder, Sylvia Hartman, starts talking about coming out of the energy closet. This is just completely not surprising at all. It's crank magnetism. People with fake credentials get their fake credentials from other people with fake credentials. There's an entire ecosystem of these kinds of grifters. Folks with questionable credentials who are adopting a fundamentally anti-science stance.
Like, that's why they're being quote-unquote
by
censored.
claiming that they have the real science.
Because it's wrong.
They
because
are
it's absurd.
absurdly common in self-help, dieting, and alternative medicine. But as we see here, the more mathematical sciences are hardly immune. Okay, so those are just some of the folks that Robert Sungenis hangs out with. In addition to his fake degree, Robert is a tradcath, or traditionalist Catholic, which is a term that we should dig a little deeper into. In casual modern use, tradcath tends to just refer to a particularly conservative strain of Catholic thinker, but Robert is a bit more of a
he's probably like a
traditional
Francoist.
tradcath, which means he errs a lot more towards the philosophical roots of the term, which is rooted in opposition to the Second Vatican Council, aka Vatican II. Held between 1959 and 1965, this was a series of formal debates within the Catholic Church in direct response to a number of internal and external pressures, such as the growing civil rights movement in America, women's liberation, declining church attendance, the evangelical/non-denominational movement, and growing criticism and scrutiny. It was, in short, an attempt at modernizing the church. These sessions resulted in a number of substantial changes to church operations, general policy, logistical changes, and official redefinition of the relationship between the church and various social groups.
This is also like, when did the Pope pardon fucking Galileo?
Among the more obvious and dramatic changes were that it became
about
formally permitted for Mass to be administered in a language that wasn't Latin, a policy called vernacular Mass, and encouraged
they did vernacular Mass in like 59.
Greater emphasis on lay participation rather than strict clerical
That was in the
dispensation.
90s. Oh, yeah.
This means 1, getting general congregants more involved in weekly services, and 2, actually performing.
I know that like QAnon people think that the Vatican is a part of the global like puppet thing, which sort of reminds me of what like Nazis say about Christianity, is that because it's Judeo-Christian, then they don't like it.
Mass in the language that the congregation speaks.
The implication by QAnon people being that like the vaguely anti-Semitic but always what becomes anti-Semitic cabal, the Pope is also in on it.
This is also when the church formally changed its opinion on the death of Jesus, stating, "True, the Jewish authorities and those who followed their lead pressed for the death of Christ. Still, what happened in his passion cannot be charged against all the Jews without distinction then alive, nor against the Jews of today.
There it is.
Although the church is the new people
Again, it's always back to anti-Semitism.
God, the Jews should not be presented as rejected.
This is the thing. I do see this discourse happening online that like anti-Semitism in American society like isn't a big deal, or it sort of has gone away, and that for the most part like all American Jews are white. And like that might be true for some group of Jewish people, especially those who like personally say that, yeah, no, my experience is just like the same as average white people. But anti-Semitism is still a very integral element of especially the American right. There's been a very clear uptick in anti-Semitic hate crimes.
Or accursed by God. So they no longer held all Jews categorically responsible for the death of Jesus, which they previously...
Which I believe, what is it? Like, it's a shocking amount. I think I bookmarked this tweet so I can bring it up. Where is it? FBI released crime stats, which, you know, for 2019. Jews only make 1.8% of the population, but they're a target of 60.3% of hate crimes motivated by religious bias, which is an increase. And that's 2019. So it's definitely, you know, far-right movements there's an imminent quality of far-right movements in Western society, which is that there was an uptick in anti-Semitism as a result of them.
We had.
Which, you know, explains all this shit as well, because this all funnels itself into QAnon.
And other right-wing shit. And hundreds of years. I guess better late than never? The last change I want to mention was the church pivoting its view on non-Catholic Christian denominations, reverting the anti-Reformation Council of Trent, viewing Protestants and the Eastern Orthodox tradition specifically as separated brethren rather than heretics. This is a subtle but important policy change because it effectively signaled that the various traditionalist denominations shared common political interests, and it would be more important to cooperate on those fronts than hold on to old sectarian grudges. But in doing so, the church ceded its absolute stance of supreme authority. So this is complicated. Vatican II is in some regards progressive, but only as progressive as needed to retain membership and improve political relations with other conservative organizations. So imagine the kind of person who thinks it was going too far. Now, in all fairness, Sungenis has stated in a 2005 article for Catholic paper The New Oxford Review, we must accept Vatican II as a legitimate ecumenical council without dogmatic error and designed for the good of the Church. In reality, 95% of its words are unproblematic. Which
5% do we think it is? Which 5% of the words do you think is problematic?
The other 5% is interpreted in the light of tradition rather than liberalism and neo-modernism, we shouldn't have too much problem ironing out any difficulties. So he doesn't reject it categorically or even have much complaint with the vast majority of the actual contents. What he does have problems with is that issue of supreme authority. Just when we needed a strong hand to remind us of our moral obligations in the midst of a world gone crazy with the lust for power, e.g. World Wars I and II, and a world either contemplating or actually indulging in some of its worst sins, e.g. contraception, abortion, divorce, promiscuity, homosexuality.
The worst sins of the 20th century. The worst sins committed in the 20th century. Contraception, abortion, divorce, promiscuity, homosexuality.
The prelates of Vatican II more or less forgot why the traditional church, through her regimen of strong laws and purifying disciplines, insisted on keeping tight reins on her people. This is why liberalism will never work on this earth. Its utopian ideals ignore the fact that deep within man there is a sin problem that simply won't go away by wishful thinking. Keep in mind that when he says liberalism in this context, he's talking about
just like nothing about like the Holocaust and genocide and war crimes.
Locke and Thomas Hobbes. He means democracy. He's saying democracy will never work.
Yeah.
So one of the main things that people praise Vatican II for, creating sanctioned room within the church.
It's referring to liberalism as an anti-monarchical force, which again, he's a fucking Francoist at that point.
Liberation theology and thus the likes of Oscar Romero. That's the stuff he really takes issue with. This brings me to one of Robert Sungenis' other friends and fellow The Principal participant, Martin Selbrede. I'm gonna warn you, this guy is a huge piece of garbage with some truly repugnant beliefs. This does get a bit heavy. This is Martin Selbrede, a geocentrist and theologian. He has advocated for a geocentric model for years, both within fundamentalist Christian circles as a companion to creationism and externally in debates with the actual scientific community. Martin is the vice president of the Chalcedon Foundation, a Christian Reconstructionist think tank dedicated to lobbying for laws that conform to their interpretation of biblical laws. This manifests practically in two forms. The first of these is a specific form of libertarianism that philosophically is opposed to large nation states, but in the short term manifests in the push for extremely permissive homeschooling standards, which, I mean, Martin here is in a documentary arguing that the Earth is the center of the universe, so you can probably imagine what the curriculum looks like. Also, they stand in opposition to, like, anti-discrimination laws that prevent employers from firing people for being trans. The second expression is an explicit push for returning things to the natural order, enshrining Christian supremacy and eliminating the separation of church and state. Now, a number of people have posited that this extreme position means the Chalcedon Foundation supports policies like the death penalty as a punishment for homosexuality, and indeed, the Southern Poverty Law Center lists the Chalcedon Foundation as a hate group for exactly that reason. In response to these accusations, the Chalcedon Foundation plays a little rhetorical game where they deflect by repeatedly saying they support biblical law. It's a way of pretending to deny something without denying it, but it's also a way of confirming something without having to actually say it out loud. Selbrede, in a 2007 article titled Answering Tough Questions About Christian Reconstruction, frames it like this. Decade after decade, as a nation grows more biblically consistent and an ever-increasing percentage of its population regards the law of God as the proper standard of morality, it is likely the resulting social pressures, now so successfully applied via our current culture of political correctness, would gradually revert back in favor of biblical moral expectations.
Triple parentheses, political correctness.
Causing most biblically illicit conduct to seek more private venues beyond the reach of eyewitnesses to the act, well before any such biblical laws became transcribed into civil law. The idea of some kind of wholesale slaughter of, say, homosexuals is a total fabrication resting on a fragmentary, piecemeal, unsystematized approach to biblical law. Biblical law deals with concrete acts observed by qualified eyewitnesses. Translated, he does support the state-sanctioned murder of homosexuals, but only as long as it's systematized. And he claims it wouldn't matter anyway. You wouldn't actually get that many executions because all of the overt social hostility towards homosexuality would drive all of the gays back into the closet long before you could even make homosexuality illegal, let alone a capital offense. Remember that libertarianism?
I feel like,
yeah, they oppose.
I feel like most of these psychos are sort of remnants of the 14th century. More than anything, but remnants of like a previous context, in that like the insane psychotic fascists of the future are like, I mean, you know, probably still as evil as them, but it manifests in a different
large nation states like the USA, because
these people want to go back. This is like Evola shit, you know. They want to go back to monarchies. They view early political liberalism as like something that should have been undone.
They believe that large nations will inevitably be multicultural purely as a consequence of encompassing large numbers of people across large geographic areas, which provides the opportunity for minority cultures to find common cause, unite, and push for their interests. Thus, smaller, local Christian hegemons are better equipped to enforce biblical law and keep the underclass suppressed. Fun stuff. These guys are the philosophical.
No, it's not. It's not expected the Spanish Inquisition to make a comeback. Like the role of the Catholic Church, since the development of capitalism has been destroyed essentially and is being undone, and further, you know, it's why the Pope is ostensibly anti-capitalist. He's not anti-capitalist because he thinks that, like, you know, we should have a classless, stateless society. He does it because the Catholic Church lost its grip on countries like France and Spain and Italy because of capitalism, because of the resulting sort of social upheaval and sort of, the everything solid turning into, melting into air or whatever, like the quote from the Communist Manifesto, that results from capitalism.
Of the principle, and the rest of the film is structured to make it look
and
like
all of these Catholic psychos, ever since that have happened, have been just desperately struggling to like try to gain back power, try to make it like it was the 15th century again, and it never will be.
All these scientists really secretly.
Oh, I mean, just like every other system, when it takes place, capitalism is, as it existed, wildly revolutionary. Just in the context of it taking place, it is now firmly entrenched as the status quo. So it stops being the case in a certain sense.
Agree with them.
What is it? Marx writes that like the capitalist class is, world historically speaking, the most revolutionary class.
Can I just say that this setup for Lawrence Krauss's interview with this green edge light, that it's hideous?
That's
I get
awful.
the intent, but it looks gross, and no one else is lit like that. Anyway, one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about the principle is because the film itself isn't entirely incompetent. It's a pretty good example of how the narrative language of documentary can be utilized rhetorically, because the entire foundation of the film is to make a discredited idea seem not just plausible, but supported. And to do that, you need to launder a few things. So this is how you scrub the ideas. You don't say, we're making a movie proving that the Earth is the center of the universe. You say, we're making a movie about changes in our understanding of the Copernican principle, or we're making a movie about the history and future of cosmology.
There's just nothing about the Jews in the film. It just isn't. It's a film about cosmology. It's a film about the Copernican principle.
It's not wrong. You haven't lied.
My shirt that says that my film does not contain anything about the Jews is creating a lot of questions that are answered by the shirt.
You've just omitted a conclusion that you know participants will disagree with. You don't do a total hack job where you cut up
Are there a bunch of Pentecostals in the Brazilian riot?
what people are saying to make them say the opposite of what they meant.
I noticed she was sitting on her sweet can. I grab her sweet can. Oh.
You use framing and juxtaposition, the Kuleshov effect, to manufacture consensus. You take two scientists, and in between them, you sandwich a guy with a fake doctorate who wrote a book called Galileo Was Wrong.
Right.
Technically speaking, you don't take any of the three out of context. You aren't lifting razor-thin sound bites, but all three are energized, excited, and seemingly in agreement with each other. This is a fine line. You haven't made anyone say something they didn't. You've just created the appearance that they support ideas that they don't. It's a form of misrepresentation that's exhausting to litigate and honestly isn't worth it beyond, like, writing an op-ed.
That's what I was gonna say. My association with like Pentecostals, insofar as I've known them, people who go to Pentecostal churches, is that it's being like it's marketed as like a progressive sort of non-denominational branch of the church,
putting out some mean tweets.
But I don't, like, my understanding is fairly...
That's why no one who
shitty.
was involved who spoke out against the film took it any farther than just mean tweets. What's interesting to me is that the filmmakers have a narrative that they're trying to work and have continued to work even after the film's release.
Pentecostalism
One of the
started
things
in the
film
black church. Right.
suggests with a wink and a nudge is the outline of a conspiracy that is actively suppressing this information.
All I have to do to shut up geocentrists is to run this experiment up on the moon and
top 10 tricks to shut up a geocentrist.
And all of physics collapses with that experiment. I think there's a reason not to put the experiment on the moon. Albert Einstein himself said that
I believe it was Albert Einstein that said that Liv posting is correct and anyone who disagrees with her is wrong.
Michelson-Morley is wrong, then relativity is wrong.
It implies that all these scientists really do agree that the prevailing evidence suggests a geocentric world, but they can't speak plainly about it because they would be ostracized from the scientific community, lose their jobs, lose access to grant money, and generally throw a huge wrench into their own lives.
If one day God comes down from above and says, look, these two great theories, relativity and the quantum theory, are wrong, what would I say? First of all, I would say, oh my God, all my published works are wrong. I mean, I'll have to look for another job.
This also lets the filmmakers frame themselves as doing the interviewees a favor by leaving it as innuendo, and that in turn builds a sense of intrigue, that this is a view that's so taboo we dare not even say its name.
Yeah. We've clearly touched a nerve. We're clearly questioning something that some very powerful people are uncomfortable having questions.
Holding truth to power.
Also, can we talk for a moment about...
Because again, it's awesome, the anti-authoritarianism that is like, there's a veneer of... I mean, American fascism is going to come with like, with the people who are subscribed to it believing that they're like rational skeptics. Who are like questioning authority and doing truth to power or whatever, is that like, why fundamentally in a material analysis of politics, why would there be a massive cover up ever since like Galileo that actually the sun revolves around the earth? What materially speaking does anyone have to gain in attempting to prove that and continue to ensure that it's true?
The absurdity of a bunch of Catholics claiming that their cosmological model is being suppressed by some nebulous group. So after the trailer for the film comes out, a number of the participants issued statements
to aid in the reign of
basically saying
Satan.
they
I guess
had no
that's
idea
it.
what the scope of the project was. They were presented out of context. They don't remember being interviewed for a pro-geocentric documentary. The filmmakers counter by posting a response video to YouTube, and this is where they continue that little sleight of hand trick from earlier. In the response video, they include extended clips of some interviews, some behind-the-scenes footage, and a copy of Krauss's image release form.
Lawrence Krauss
signed a release form. Here it is.
Yeah,
There's
let's roll the release form.
1,500 news articles saying
Oh,
that it
God.
doesn't exist. Yeah.
That last one is a real trick. In presenting the image release forms, they're submitting evidence for one thing and implying it's evidence of another. See, the signed release does
what does it
prove
say?
that Krauss signed a release with Stellar Motion Pictures
Yeah.
Incorporated. But it
Did the
doesn't
release say that like the earth, that the sun revolves around the
prove that
earth?
the interviewers were forthright with the underlying motives of the production.
There's been
let's roll the release form.
1,500 news articles saying that it doesn't exist. Yes, it exists.
And he
Let's
signed
show
it.
it real quick. Yes, it does tell him that we're going to be seeking out
He said I might have signed a release form,
a
didn't he?
controversial.
It's the same release. Everybody got the
It's
same
the
release.
sa- everybody
right?
got
Yeah,
the
your
same
lawyers
release.
made it up. There's no
And
multiple releases.
It's very clear.
Nothing in this bog standard release says this movie is going to be anti-Copernican, anti-Galilean,
Right.
pro-geocentric.
So it doesn't
That
prove anything.
Informed consent is merely implied. And again, Rick is highly susceptible to conspiratorial thinking, so he just leaves it assumed as though it's self-evidently obvious that there's an organized conspiracy to stop them.
We had no chance with the principle against the forces that were arrayed against us. We were just...
Funny enough, by posting all this stuff in the Thought Crime follow-up video, they actually give us a really good insight into how you go about tricking a bunch of physicists into being in a geocentric documentary.
Right,
In an
I wanna
extended
see
clip
that.
of Max Tegmark
How do you
being
do that?
interviewed by Delano,
Not
they
that I
show
wanna
us
make a
the kinds of
documentary like
questions
this.
that they were asking. Also, keep in mind that this footage is being presented to support the argument that Rick Delano did not disguise the subject or intent of the film.
Let me read another quote from Professor Krauss. Yeah. And just get, and then we can move on from this particular aspect, because the centrality of Earth in the cosmic microwave background is a fascinating, yeah, it could be a mistake, it could be a glitch, but there are other elements that are pointing in the same direction. Now, Professor Krauss says, when you look at the CMB map, you see that the structure that is observed is in fact, in a weird way, correlated with the plane of the Earth around the sun. Is this Copernicus coming back to haunt us? That's crazy. We're looking out at the whole universe. There's no way there should be a correlation of structure with our motion of the Earth around the sun, the plane of the Earth around the sun, the ecliptic. That would say we are truly the center of the universe. Would you agree with that assessment?
It's just
okay. So there's a couple things happening here. First of all, that question was 162 words long. It's a lot of rambling, it's a lot of overlapping ideas, and then the core of it is framed not as a question from the filmmakers, but as an opportunity to respond to something Professor Krauss said.
Let me read another quote from Professor Krauss.
See, there's a big difference between asking someone if Earth is the center of the universe and asking them to reply to a colleague. The second is a lot more likely to get a much more diplomatic, measured response where they don't openly disagree, but instead suggest that, maybe they were just talking really fast and didn't word their ideas the best, or maybe the data has some nuance that's difficult to explain, or there's some additional controls that need to be implemented into testing.
Would you agree with that assessment?
I don't think that this is telling us that Earth is in any way the center of the universe.
And that kind of
No,
overly
right.
cautious response is how you get the kind of replies that you can use to construct consensus.
And if you just give a listen, I think it'll make it quite clear that we were very upfront about what we were talking about.
Documentary operates off the assumption of good faith. We go into a documentary willing to believe that the filmmakers are communicating,
Which is
at the
bad,
very
'cause,
least,
you
the
know.
essence of the truth. A lot of these editing techniques...
I feel like there is probably stuff about this, because I'm like vaguely familiar, but like the capacity that a documentary has to mislead people and present evidence as if it's like as if they're like showing both sides of a thing and have these like expert opinions that are agreeing with them is like quite alarming.
Or even just techniques in general are really conventional, like juxtaposing.
A lot of Netflix documentaries, I think, do that as well, where they have a particular narrative and the actual presenting of what is like empirically known is done in
Several
a pretty,
speakers in sequence. It's a very normal way to communicate
destructive
consensus.
way.
And it's not misleading if the three people agreeing with each other actually agree with each other. It's not bad form.
I mean, just like QAnon documentaries, right? There's a really big one. I can't remember what it's called, but it pills a lot of people.
To ask participants to respond to statements made by other participants. It's a very normal thing to do as you're building.
Oh yeah, that Michael Moore doc was like really poorly done, right? About climate change, Planet of the Humans.
Narrative of the documentary, and is a very normal way to go about getting clear, focused answers when illustrating disagreements on a subject. In that regard, the principle is an excellent cautionary tale, a reminder to always keep in the back of your head that a documentary will never be the entire story.
Okay, this is good.
Okay.
Actually, you can watch the rest of this if you want. I'll probably end the stream now. Here we go. In like an hour or something, it's short stream. I'm sort of busy doing stuff. I'm streaming a little bit less right now, which is I will get back to like regular schedule of streaming way more soonish. I'm just finishing my school stuff basically. In like an hour or so or something, but probably a bit more than that. I will be going on the QAnon Anonymous podcast or Twitch. So go follow them if you want to see me there, because I'm technically not done streaming today. So that'll be fun. Are you playing Among Us tomorrow? I was not invited to the Jagmeet Singh Among Us thing. No, I was not invited to that. I'll raid Chelsea Manning, friend of the stream, who's playing Hearts of Iron 4 at the moment. And I'll see you guys. It wasn't Lance. Lance told me like if he had any say in it, he would have added me. Or he said that if he did have any say, he was gonna suggest adding me, and I'm assuming that he just didn't. Yeah, go watch Chelsea, friend of the stream. And I join my Discord if you haven't already. It'll ping you when I go live, all that shit. I keep spelling Discord wrong. I don't stream tomorrow. I'm going to stream on... Next time I stream is Saturday, 3 p.m. Pacific time. So I'll see you guys then. And yeah, goodbye.